In the Planescape campaign setting for D&D, there are 17 outer planes, which are essentially the realms of D&D's afterlife. There's one for each moral alignment, ranging from lawful evil to chaotic good and everything in between. I've already covered the planes of lawful evil, lawful good, chaotic evil, and neutral lawful good in depth, as well as Sigil, the city that sits at the center of the outer planes. In this video, I'll be covering the plane of lawful neutrality, the clockwork universe of Mechanus. As always, I'll be pulling from all the D&D sources I can find, but most of the source material is from 2nd edition, the edition that Planescape was made for. Mechanus doesn't even exist in 4th edition, for the most part, and it doesn't exist in the World Tree cosmology that's been used here and there for the Forgotten Realms setting, either. And if you're only interested in particular parts of the video, I've provided timestamps for you to skip through, which I say mostly for people who don't like my musings on the problems of moral philosophy that inevitably come up when attempting to seriously consider D&D's alignments. And that's pretty much mostly just the next section of the video. Seeing the planes I've already made videos on, you might be thinking, shouldn't you do a chaotic plane? You're starting to skew awfully lawful. Why Mechanus? And you know, I thought about that, but I wanted to give viewers like you a say. So I asked my YouTube audience which plane they wanted to see next, and then I had my Patreon supporters vote on the top 5 choices. And they voted for Mechanus. And I'm not mad about it. Mechanus is one of my favorite planes, if not my favorite plane. But the point is, if you want to have some control over what videos I make next, then consider joining my Patreon. In addition to voting on videos, you also get your name at the end of my videos, as well as access to ad-free versions of my videos. But there is one more thing I want to talk about, and that's this video's sponsor. This is actually my first sponsorship, so when Dice Nest reached out to me, I was a bit apprehensive, but also open-minded. Dice Nest makes luxury handcrafted dice, and offered to send me any set of dice on their website to see if I like them. They've got a lot of cool looking dice, but the set that struck my eye the most was Mystic Luminance, and this is what they look like in person. I'm the kind of TTRPG player who appreciates some good dice. I'm a physical dice kind of guy. For me, a large portion of the fun of D&D is the tactility of it. Being in the same physical space with my friends, sharing snacks, using pen and paper, and real dice. And these are definitely the best looking dice I own. They're solid and weighty and feel high quality. They feel freshly cut, and they've got these interesting beveled edges that I don't think I've seen before. I'll certainly be using them as my main dice from now on. But when I take sponsorships, I do want to be an honest reviewer. So I have to mention that when I say these are luxury dice, I mean luxury. They're not cheap. But if you're in the market for some cool, high-end dice that are sure to get noticed at the gaming table, then go to dicenest.com and use my affiliate code, WadeAllen, for 15% off your order. I earn 15% on all orders that use my code. So if you're looking to help support what I do, but you want something tangible out of it as well, this is a good way to do that. But anyway, let's take a tour through Mechanus. Since Planescape is a campaign setting so invested in philosophy, particularly ethical philosophy, as each of the planes represents a moral alignment, and the nature of the planes are shaped by people's beliefs about those planes and the actions of their inhabitants, I find that the best starting position for understanding a plane is by understanding its moral alignment. Mechanus is the plane of lawful neutrality. So what is lawful neutrality? In 1st edition AD&D, which I often skip in these videos because it predates Planescape, but I'll include it here, lawful neutral characters view regulation as all-important, taking a middle road between good and evil. They believe that the ultimate harmony of the universe has its sole hope in bringing predictability and order to all. In 2nd edition, which technically this comes from a pre-Planescape book, lawful people believe that order in society is vital. Where chaos is more individualist, law is more collectivist. Strength comes through unity of action. People that are neutral with respect to good and evil often refrain from passing judgment or classifying things as good or evil. So then, lawful neutral characters value order and organization above all else. They desire a strong, well-ordered government. It doesn't matter to them whether that's a tyranny or a benevolent democracy. In 3rd edition, lawful characters tell the truth, keep their word, respect authority, and honor tradition. Law implies honor, trustworthiness, obedience to authority, and reliability. And it can lead to close-mindedness, judgmentalness, and a lack of adaptability. Those who are neutral on the question of good and evil have compunctions against killing the innocent, but lack the commitment to make sacrifices to protect or help other people. They're only committed to others by personal relationships, willing to make sacrifices for those they love, but not for strangers. Lawful neutral characters, then, follow law, tradition, or a personal code. Order and organization once again are paramount to them. Being lawful neutral is to be reliable and honorable without being a zealot. In 4th edition, there is no such thing as lawful neutrality. 4th edition ditches the 2-axis alignment system used by the previous 3 editions in favor of a more pared down and less useful version where the only lawful alignment is lawful good, at least in name. The evil alignment is basically lawful evil. In 5th edition, lawful neutral characters act in accordance with law, tradition, or personal codes. The 2024 edition just adds that lawful neutral characters lead a disciplined life and aren't swayed by the demands of those in need or by the temptations of evil. But 3rd edition already said that. Since 4th edition's description of lawful neutral doesn't exist, and 5th edition's barely exists since it's so short and doesn't add anything that 3rd edition didn't already say, we really just have 1st through 3rd edition to think about. But there is also this little section in the Planes of Law book that I think is worth bringing to your attention, as this is the book where most of the information on Mechanus actually comes from. It says that lawful creatures believe that order underlies everything, even chaos. Law is not just about rules, it's about identification and classification, understanding the nature of the universe. It's about discovery and naming and knowledge. Something that's interesting about the pre-Planescape 2e edition, at least interesting to me, is that it is very much not consequentialist, which I would say is the prevailing ethical framework in our day and age, including when 2nd edition was written. That is, I think that most people are mostly consequentialists, specifically utilitarians. I phrase it that way purposefully, as it leaves room for individuals to be mostly consequentialist, but not entirely, which is a stance that I think makes perfect sense, and that I've defended in some of my older videos on this channel. If you're not aware, consequentialism is an ethical framework that judges the morality of an action on the consequences of that action. Simply put, if the result is good, it doesn't really matter how you accomplished it. Although, of course, there's a wide spectrum of ideas within consequentialism that would expand on or put qualifications on that statement. A popular example of consequentialist thinking is contained within the trolley problem, where an unstoppable train is barreling down a track, upon which a group of 5 innocent people are tied. There's a split in the track that could set the train on a different route, where only 1 innocent person is tied down. You stand at the switch, capable of diverting the train onto the less deadly, but still quite deadly, track. What do you do? To some, flipping the switch feels like murder, whereas doing nothing feels excusable because you can't be blamed for the situation being as it is. You didn't tie down those people or set the train on its course. It can feel like interacting with the situation at all imposes a moral burden on you that you otherwise wouldn't have. But a consequentialist simply does the math. If you do nothing, 5 people die. If you flip the switch, only 1 person dies. All else being equal, it's better for 1 person to die than 5, so the choice is clear. I find this 2nd edition lawful neutral description interesting because it is expressly anti-consequentialist when so many of the other D&D alignments are consequentialist. For example, the 2nd edition lawful good description says that lawful good characters strive to bring the greatest benefit to the most people and cause the least harm, which is utilitarianism, a form of consequentialism. 2nd edition lawful neutrality instead employs an ethic of intention or motive. A soldier who never questions his orders, no matter what they are, is given as an exemplar of lawful neutrality. A person like me, who is so used to thinking primarily in terms of consequence and only secondarily, or even tertiarily, in terms of intention, immediately imagines scenarios where the soldier's orders are to kill innocent people. Can the soldier really be said to be lawful neutral when they're doing something so obviously evil? According to 2nd edition, yes. The soldier's motives are not to kill people, but to follow orders, which just so happens to be to kill people. In this case, the consequences of the action apparently don't matter, only the motivation for the action. According to this view, you could say that the person who gave the order is evil, because they want innocent people killed, but the person who carries out the order is exempt from this judgment, because what they want is merely to follow orders. Needless to say, I disagree with this view, which is one reason why I've spent time talking about it. And as I've already pointed out, it's not even consistent with the rest of the moral alignment system of its own edition. Another example of this is 2nd edition's description of evil, which says, "Only a few people of evil nature actively seek to cause harm or destruction. Most simply do not recognize that what they do is destructive or disruptive. People and things that obstruct the evil character's plans are mere hindrances that must be overcome. If someone is harmed in the process, well, that's too bad." Doesn't that fit perfectly with the mindset of a 2nd edition lawful neutral person? They're not trying to cause harm or destruction, they're just trying to further their own goals of creating and maintaining an ordered society, no matter the cost to those around them. If it means killing people, well, that's too bad. One thing I really like about 3rd edition's description of neutrality with respect to good and evil is that it makes clear that neutral people are generally unwilling to kill the innocent, which would lead me to believe that a lawful neutral person would not obey orders to kill innocent people simply because they're orders. I think this is a much needed boundary between neutrality and evil that other editions don't clearly have, especially 2nd edition. It makes it so that good is about going out of your way to help people, evil is about harming people, and neutrality is a general unwillingness to do either. While I do think 3rd edition raises the bar for what it takes to be evil maybe a bit too high, I do appreciate that there is at least a clear distinction between all three. 1st edition's description also makes a bit of a distinction between good, evil, and neutrality, but I think 3rd edition does a better job at this. 2nd edition, though, muddies things. This is because, rather than saying, as 1st edition does, that lawful neutral characters take a middle road between good and evil, 2nd edition specifically states that a lawful neutral character would happily engage in either good or evil in the pursuit of law. I can certainly empathize with the many people who dislike the alignment system altogether because of things like this. Not just that the alignments themselves might seem poorly thought out or don't mesh with the moral framework of the players using them, and not just that the alignment systems from edition to edition disagree with each other, but also that the alignment system of a single edition doesn't even mesh well with itself. Obviously, the D&D writers are not professional moral philosophers, so oversights might be expected. And as is often the case, the writers leave most of the heavy lifting to the DM. And that's something I like to do in these sections of these videos. Identify some of these problems and try to work them out a little bit, both in terms of D&D and real life. It's difficult to reconcile Tui's description of lawful neutrality and the evil of apathy that I discussed in my video on the Grey Waste, because this too seems to me to be an evil of apathy. You don't care if anyone gets hurt. One difference that I can see is that the Grey Waste's evil involves a more complete type of apathy. It's apathy about more or less everything, a waste of all life and potential. Whereas with Mechanus, you may be apathetic about good and evil, but you care an awful lot about order. Is that what it takes to avoid being evil? You can be apathetic about causing harm so long as you have strong feelings about how society should operate? You can engage in all manner of evil so long as your intention is not to do evil, but to create order? Personally, I don't buy it. I prefer 3rd edition in this case, where a lawful neutral character has a general unwillingness to do evil things, just as they have an unwillingness to do good things. You might say, but that would mean a lawful neutral character would disobey orders. They wouldn't do that. Well, think about it this way. If a lawful neutral character gets an order that involves unduly harming people, or unduly helping them for that matter, perhaps they could recognize this as a deviation from pure law. They might recognize the bias toward good or evil in their superior officer, and rather than obeying the order, they might feel compelled to report their superior officer for veering off the course of pure law. Think of it not as rebellion by the soldier, but rather rebellion by the superior that the soldier is refusing to support. Is it not more in the spirit of pure law to serve pure law and pure law only, rather than to mindlessly serve the cause of lawful evil? What's more important to a lawful neutral character, following orders or following their alignment? Although perhaps that line of thinking only applies to cases where the superior making the order really does have a bias, because I can certainly imagine cases where the harm caused is incidental all the way up the chain of command. For example, you want to expand your orderly society by creating a highway, so you task your workers with building a highway in some specific area. Well, it turns out that people already live in that area. To get this highway built, you're going to have to displace them. Whether you do so through force or you get them to agree to it, they're not going to be happy about it. But the suffering you're inflicting upon them is incidental. Nobody expressly wanted it. But this all still feels like it falls under the category of evil to me, where you don't care about any suffering that you may create in the pursuit of your goals. So, if this is truly the shape of neutrality, at least as far as Mechanus is concerned, perhaps then the primary difference between evil and neutrality is that evil characters act out of a personal self-interest, whereas neutral characters act out of a collective interest. An evil character doesn't care about the harm caused in the pursuit of their own personal advancement, whereas a lawful neutral character doesn't care about the harm caused in the pursuit of the advancement of society and law, but would be unwilling to cause harm merely for personal gain. And what distinguishes a lawful evil character from a lawful neutral character is that the evil one does both. Another way that I find all this interesting is that it actually reveals one of the many problems with consequentialism, and perhaps is a strength of the second edition lawful neutral description. We have a soldier who never questions orders. I would argue that the soldier is evil if the orders they follow are evil. But what if that same soldier, the one who would be perfectly willing to follow evil orders, never gets ordered to do something evil? What if they only ever get ordered to provide medicine to hospitals in impoverished regions? Are they now a good person? Since consequentialism only cares about the results of their actions, it is insufficient for describing a person's character. After all, can you really be said to be a good person if you've only ever done good things, but would be perfectly willing to do absolutely evil things if asked, but you've just never been asked? I would say no. And to me, this reveals that there is an unequal standard between what it takes to be a good person compared to being a bad person. In real life, anyway. In second edition, the standard is the same. If you're perfectly willing to do evil things if instructed to, but have no desire to do evil things, that makes you lawful neutral. As long as the evil you do is entirely incidental, done in the pursuit of order, then you're not evil. If you don't like that, feel free to change it at your table. But it does tell us something quite important about Mechanus. Terrible things can happen here. A whole lot of evil can get done in the name of law. Order does not care about your feelings or your life. That doesn't mean, by any means, that this is a terrible or evil place. Good things can happen here too. It's just that it's easy to get ground up in the gears. After all, when the Modrons go on their great march, they don't care what they trample. Mechanus, also called Nirvana or the Clockwork Universe, is the plane of ultimate, unfeeling order. It's said to contain no passion, illusions, or pain, which is perhaps one reason why it's called Nirvana. Though, with how readily the inhabitants are willing to sentence lawbreakers to death here, I'm not sure no pain is an accurate description. Though perhaps the methods of execution are painless. But the claim of no pain is something you'll find in 1st and 3rd edition, but not 2nd, not in the Planescape books. Either way, this is a place of perfectly regimented order, where individual consciousness exists only to perfect order. But just because Mechanus is orderly doesn't mean that you, or even anyone, can understand it. Surely there are intricacies here that even the gods can't fathom. Mechanus is home to all manner of law, from the dead simple to the devilishly subtle and complex. This plane seems to compel people to learn the hidden paths of law, and teaches them to look for law in chaos. Just about everything is regulated in Mechanus. That means that any newcomer is bound to break a law or 300 while visiting. And if you want to make sure your adventures in Mechanus are legal, it'll mean bureaucracy, filling out a lot of paperwork, getting licensed, waiting in lines, that sort of thing. When you inevitably break a law, you'll be arrested and brought before a judge, usually a Modron, which I'll describe later. There are 4 varieties of law keepers in Mechanus. There's Modrons, wandering around the plane, usually in groups of 5, making sure everything remains orderly. There's governors, members of the Fraternity of Order, who travel in groups of 9. Then there are vigilantes, licensed by some group or another to hunt down criminals. They're bounty hunters, basically. Whether they straight up kill you or drag you off to court depends on who they're working for. And then there's the mercy killers, and you really don't want to be caught by them. They're not licensed, so they're breaking the law too. They just don't care. The way they see it, it's worth breaking the law to punish a criminal. They're the most likely to outright kill you, though luckily they're probably the rarest sight as they leave Mechanus between hunts. If you do get arrested, which you probably will, the place you'll most likely be brought is the Central Office for the Punishment of Offenders in Regulus, the realm of the Modrons. If you violated the law unknowingly, you'll just get a minor punishment, perhaps a couple days of hard labor, polishing one of Mechanus's many cogs, for instance. If you're found to have broken the law knowingly, well, the sentence will most likely be death. The way the inhabitants of Mechanus see it, law is more important than life, so any life without law just isn't worth living, and they're happy to make that decision for you. And don't get your hopes up about there not being enough evidence to convict you. The judges and lawmakers of Mechanus have learned how to draw evidence from the plane itself. Mechanus is a plane of balance. It contains hot and cold in equal measure, so too light and dark, solid and liquid, and so on. The plane is an infinitely large void filled with floating, interlocking, rotating gears, which means the entire plane is constantly in motion. Gears are also frequently called cogs or disks, so I'll use these words interchangeably. Though, technically speaking, the word cog actually refers to the teeth of a cog, not the gear itself, but not here, I guess, so cogs it is. Some cogs are the size of small islands, others are the size of continents, though first edition says that none of these disks are smaller than 500 miles in radius. The void that these gears float in is an inky black. There's no sun, moon, or stars. The cogs themselves are the source of light for this plane. Each one radiates its own light, lightening and darkening on its own cycle. So it could be nighttime in one gear and daytime on an adjacent gear, though perhaps it's not as drastic as that. It could be that adjacent cogs have similar day-night cycles, with cycles getting more and more dissimilar the further away the gears are from each other. I like to imagine that the length of a disk's day-night cycle is proportional to its size, so that very large gears have extremely long days and nights, perhaps lasting weeks or months, while very small gears have extremely short days and nights, perhaps lasting hours or minutes. Though when you're standing on a gear, it's not like the rest of Mechanus isn't there. Other gears are visible as far as the eye can see. On cogs that are bigger than a couple miles across, maybe you can't see anything other than the gear you're on. Though that's not often the case, because the gears of Mechanus don't only exist on a single plane. And by that I mean a mathematical plane, a two-dimensional flat space. So don't get confused with the terms there. Gears can interlock with each other perpendicularly as well, which means that another gear might be positioned vertically in any direction around you or positioned horizontally above your head. So even on a very large gear, chances are good that you'll still be able to see more of them somewhere in the sky. What I would gather this means, unless my idea of day-night cycles being locally similar is true, is that you're usually exposed to the light of nearby gears. Maybe it's night for the gear you're standing on, but if it's daytime for a nearby gear, that light is going to interfere with your night's darkness. This would be especially true on very small cogs. Your nighttime is going to get completely washed out by a larger neighboring gear's light. Although perhaps there's a sort of light barrier that keeps the light of other gears from interfering too much, while still allowing you to see beyond your own gear. I suppose the exact mechanics of this are for you to decide, but all this is different in 3rd edition. Rather than the gears exuding their own light, the void is only dark half the time, and radiates a white light the other half of the time, switching every 12 hours. And in this case, because it's all, mechanical, perhaps digital rather than analog, I like to imagine that the light just switches on and off, as if there's some giant light switch somewhere in the void. So it's pitch black in the sky one moment, and then all of a sudden it's just daytime, which would be a very jarring thing for newcomers, but everybody that lives here would be used to it. Just like how each cog exudes its own light, each one also exudes its own gravity, with gravity being oriented to the plane of the cog, and I once again mean plane in the mathematical sense. Gravity here, and in many places of the Outer Planes, doesn't work the same as it does in the real world, or the prime material plane for that matter. Gravity doesn't exactly pull toward the center of mass, so it's not like there's stronger gravity in the center of a gear compared to the edges or anything like that. It's evenly distributed, and on both sides, which means habitation is possible on both sides of a disk. Though, for whatever reason, most disks only have people living on one side, traditionally referred to as the top side. But not all of them are like this. So you're really never in danger of falling off, except for in 3rd edition. You can step right over the edge and go on to the other side, no problem. Although it might be a bit disorienting. Another way that gravity works differently than how you might expect from the real world is that each gear's gravity doesn't affect other gears. So it's not as if a larger gear's gravity is going to overpower the gravity of a smaller gear. The gravity zone of a gear extends in a sphere all around it. If you go outside that boundary, you'll find yourself floating in the void, though the gravity of the closest gear will still exert a subtle influence on you, so that you'd eventually get pulled back into its proper gravity boundary, and then fall down to the surface. And by the way, the void is entirely breathable, so if you're capable of flight, you can fly between the gears, like you would in the astral plane, except it's not really because here you don't move by thought. It's actually universally breathable, which means that even aquatic creatures can breathe in the void. I think these spherical gravity boundaries are actually a point in favor of the light boundaries that I mentioned a minute ago. If the gravity of each gear is mostly self-contained, with subtle effects extending infinitely outward into the void, but being nullified by the gravity zones of other gears, perhaps the same could roughly be true of light. And while these gears are spinning, you don't really have to worry about centripetal or centrifugal force, except for in 3rd edition, which specifies that you can get spun off the edge of a cog if you're standing within 10 feet of the rim. In this edition, walking from one gear to another can be a tricky and dangerous task, at least for the inexperienced, as you stand a chance of falling and getting crushed between the turning cogs. According to 3rd edition, the gears of Mechanus are made of stone, earth, and metal, as if a deity carved them from the mantle of a prime material world. The gears are naturally devoid of vegetation and wildlife, but many of them have been furnished with plants and animals transported from the other planes. I imagine that some of the gears contain natural landscapes, some contain sprawling metropolitan areas or structures like factories, some a mix of both, and some are just empty, looking just how you'd expect a giant gear to look. And of course, these features can be different on the top and bottom of a gear. Perhaps the bottom side of a gear contains a giant mountain, while the top is just a flat expanse of smooth metal. Though generally, it would be the other way around. As I briefly mentioned earlier, the terms top and bottom don't really mean anything in any objective sense here. Rather, the top side of the cogs is defined as a matter of convention, being the side that's more inhabited, that's got more going on. It's a bit like how most people typically depict the Earth with the northern hemisphere on top, simply because the vast majority of humans live in the northern hemisphere. The purpose of the gears is a matter of much debate. Some people think the gears are just for show, that they're not for anything. This notion is often born out of the idea that nothing truly lawful could ever change or move as the gears do. But that's not quite true. It's just that whatever change happens is planned or acts according to some logic. But even if the reason behind the idea is flawed, the idea itself could still be true. Or it might be that the turning of the gears forms a basis for the objective measurement of time. Perhaps the only consistent way to keep a record of time on the multiversal scale is to refer to the cycles of the great gears of Mechanus. Some say that the cogs contain secret knowledge, and that understanding the cogs yields understanding of the multiverse. Some say that the gears are carrying out a calculation of incomprehensible proportion. The most popular idea is that Mechanus is the machinery of the multiverse, that the turning gears keep the multiverse running. It's thought that if even a single gear were to disconnect from the rest of the machinery, the entire plane would fall apart, or time would stop, or the multiverse would come to an end. But the true purpose of the gears, if there is one, is probably something only known by Primus, the One in the Prime, ruler of the Modrons. The number of gears in Mechanus is infinite. Because of this, Mechanus is sometimes considered to have an infinite number of layers, just like the Abyss. But more often, it's thought to all just be one layer. After all, in most planes, the layers are distinct places from one another. If not existing in completely different dimensions, then there's usually at least a magic barrier between them, though exceptions do exist, such as with the layers of Bitopia. In Mechanus, the gears might each have their own gravity, but they're all contiguous. You could walk throughout the whole of Mechanus without passing through any portals or magic barriers, if you had an infinite amount of time. So I think it makes more sense to consider it all just one layer, especially because that's the direction the books lean to. Though just because you could in theory walk everywhere in Mechanus, doesn't mean anybody actually does that. The best way to get around Mechanus is by using the Labyrinthine Portal. The Labyrinthine Portal isn't exactly a labyrinth, and isn't exactly a portal either. Rather, it's a vast collection of portals, all connected to each other in a complex web. See, the Labyrinthine Portal is like a mental maze. There are portals spread all throughout Mechanus, and with the right knowledge, you could get from one to any other, but you have to go through the portals in the right pattern to get where you want to go. Here's an example in miniature, to make it easier to imagine. Say there are 5 cogs, each with a corresponding double-sided portal. If you go through side A of portal 1, you end up at portal 3. If you go through side B of portal 1, you end up at portal 2. Perhaps both sides of portal 3 lead back to those same places, but the order in which you go through portals also matters. So if you go through side B of portal 3, right after coming from portal 1, well, now you end up at portal 4. And if you go through side A of portal 3, right after coming from portal 2, you end up at portal 5. So if you find the right sequence, you can end up at a destination that you'd never be able to get to from one portal alone. And of course, all of this is made more complicated by the fact that there's not just 5 cogs, but an infinite number of them, and perhaps multiple portals per cog, and sequences that can get quite long and convoluted indeed. For instance, a sequence might involve doubling back through the portal you just came through 71 times in a row, but changing sides of the portal every 3rd time, but not changing on prime numbers, which would look something like this. So the Labyrinthine Portal isn't the type of thing newcomers to Mechanus will have much proficiency with. Really, the only creatures capable of using it flawlessly are Modrons or other Mechanus natives like the Inevitables. But still, that doesn't mean it can't be useful. You can certainly learn small pieces of the puzzle for ease of traveling between a few spots you visit often. You can find people willing to give you or sell you the knowledge of paths through it, or guides to take you where you need to go. Though be careful of the predatory ones who leave you stranded in a far-off gear. And there's even said to be a map of the whole Labyrinthine Portal in Regulus. A curious feature of Mechanus is that no matter what language people speak, they can understand each other while in this plane. If 2 people have no languages in common, it doesn't matter here, though once they leave the plane, they'll go back to being unable to understand each other. Mechanus is a place that's not really hospitable to those who don't love law with their whole being. It's not like people who aren't lawful are physically incapable of living here, but rather psychologically incapable. The unremitting lawfulness of the plane just doesn't jive with their disposition. They might be able to stand it in short visits, but they're certainly not going to want to live here. The inhabitants of Mechanus are generally a serious-minded bunch. They typically stay away from games and are rather muted in their emotions, keeping them under a tight rein. Though as far as the games are concerned, I'd imagine that it depends on the game. A lot of games employ randomness, which probably isn't conducive to an orderly atmosphere. But some games are purely strategy, all rules, and quite serious and intellectual. Chess is a good example. Chess is a rather serious game with absolutely no randomness, so I could easily see the people of Mechanus enjoying chess. Unlike some other planes, the petitioners of Mechanus don't have any particular look. They look exactly like they did in life, or if they're bound to a patron deity, then they look how their deity wants them to look, which just depends on the deity. Though 3rd edition says that petitioners of Mechanus look like a stylized version of how they looked in life. If you're not aware, petitioners are people who have died and are now living out their afterlives, who usually don't retain their memories from life. I'm never sure with these videos how much I should repeat myself from other videos. On the one hand, it's probably annoying to all the people who have watched my other videos or who already know stuff about Planescape, but on the other hand, I do want these to be videos that can stand by themselves without requiring much or any previous knowledge. Anyway, something I haven't quite said before about petitioners is that they're typically one-dimensionalized in terms of their personality. Or if not one-dimensionalized, then certainly less dimensional, more simple than non-petitioners. They're often hyper-fixated on one thing, and are extremely dedicated to serving the goals of their plane or their god. A petitioner's greatest desire is to merge with their plane, strengthening it and adding to it with their essence. Usually when a petitioner dies, they merge with their plane, but they'd prefer to achieve oneness with their plane through their own path of ascension rather than death. That way they have more to add. Petitioners aren't intended to be player characters, though I have some personal disagreement with that, because I think it would be really fun to run a campaign where the player characters die and become petitioners. Petitioners of any plane have been changed by their plane in some way. The petitioners of Mechanus are notorious for being completely literal, honest, and incapable of lying. Plus, they never interpret statements. Some of them will follow orders literally even if it results in their death, as they believe they're constantly being tested in their devotion to order and law. Though, for many of them, if you ask a petitioner of Mechanus to do something, and what you say has more than one possible meaning, they'll opt to just not do it, rather than guess which meaning you meant, as that could invite chaos. Some of them are so afraid of accidental misinterpretation that they've stopped using spoken language altogether, and instead have learned to communicate with one another with smiles, shrugs, raised eyebrows, and so on. But of course, petitioners aren't the only people living in Mechanus. There are planers too, and maybe a few primes. Planers are those who were born in the outer planes, whereas primes were born in the prime material plane. The most numerous group of regular people here, and by that I mean humanoids, people who look like people, is the Fraternity of Order, also called the Governors. They're one of the factions of Sigil, one of the groups competing in the war of ideas to win over the hearts and minds of the people of the Outer Planes. Each faction of Sigil, of course, has a large contingent in Sigil itself, but they also have a base somewhere out in the plains. The Governors keep their base in Mechanus. They believe that knowledge is power, that everything has laws, though most laws are secret. If you can learn the laws of the multiverse, you can rule it. Learning the secret laws of reality and all their loopholes will grant a greater power than even the gods possess. And that's their goal, their long-term goal anyway. The way they move toward that goal is through research and study. Their base is called the Fortress of Disciplined Enlightenment, but more about that later. Another prominent group in Mechanus are the Mathematicians, though they're less prominent than the Fraternity of Order because they're a splinter group of the Governors. The Mathematicians, rather than being a faction, are a sect. The difference is that factions hold power in Sigil, sects don't. Perhaps the most obvious reason the Mathematicians aren't active in Sigil is because they place paramount importance on the plane of Mechanus. Of course, the Governors believe in the importance of Mechanus too, that's why they built their stronghold here, but the Mathematicians take it a step further. They believe not just that knowledge is the key to unlocking the universe, but that the knowledge is hidden in Mechanus specifically, or rather, is Mechanus. They believe that once the mystery of the gears is solved, once the inner workings of Mechanus are theirs to control, so too will be the universe. So they rarely see a reason to leave this plane, certainly not very often going to Sigil. The Mathematicians are deeply interested in one of the special features of this plane, and that is this. Most ideas contain a kernel of truth, or so they say, and so anything you imagine has an analog somewhere in Mechanus. It's effectively like you can imagine something into being, except it doesn't appear right before you. Instead, you have to go travel through the gears to find it, though what you imagine still has to obey the restrictions and laws of the plane. For example, if you imagined a field floating between the cogs, you'd never find that. At best, you might find a blade of grass trapped between the gravities of two cogs. And there have been those who try to make Mechanus produce vast riches or ways to acquire incredible power. Their imaginations might be successful, but they never seem to have luck actually finding the real thing. The mathematicians spend much of their time trying to discover how all this works, and they've definitely accomplished some amount of attunement with the plane, as members of the mathematicians are quite skilled at navigating the labyrinthian portal, capable of using it to get to any place that's been described to them with just a quick calculation. As you might guess, only those who are incredibly intelligent are allowed to join their sect, or would even want to. In fact, they've invented a new type of mathematics that makes calculus look like second-grade arithmetic. The final group of people worth mentioning in this section are the Brigadiers of Law, another splinter group of the Fraternity of Order. The Brigadiers of Law originally splintered off because they believed that the governors were too concerned with classification over the promotion of law. You see, the Brigadiers want to establish absolute law over everything, and they've come up with a gambit to make just that happen. They've taken over a cog in the far reaches of Mechanus, with the goal of separating it from the rest of the plane. They believe that if that happens, the whole plane will come to a grinding halt, and then so will the rest of the multiverse, stopping all motion and entropy, establishing a perfect, permanent order. There's far more than just humanoids living in Mechanus. There's a wide variety of creatures that can be found here, but not all of them are native to the plane, so I'll just talk about the ones that are. There are gear spirits, moignos, mediators, parai, and inevitables. There's also formians, but they aren't native to Mechanus and only exist in Mechanus in 3rd edition, so I'll talk about them in a later section. The gear spirits are perhaps the most elusive creatures native to Mechanus. Contrary to what their name would suggest, they're not really spirits. They're actually small pieces of living metal with faces, taking the form of common mechanical devices. They have the power to meld with metal, commandeering any mechanical device for their own use. Gear spirits aren't automatons, but rather individuals with free will, insofar as anyone can have free will anyway, which isn't that far. Gear spirits vary widely in appearance, depending on which gear they're assigned to and what task they're performing on the gear. They're kind of like the mechanical equivalent of dryads, where dryads are tenders of the forest, each one tied to a specific tree. Gear spirits are tenders of the gears, each one tied to a gear, though there is more than one spirit per gear. They maintain the gears, preventing them from eroding, and even though they're basically all over the place, most people never see them, or at least never recognize them for what they are, probably mistaking them for inanimate objects. Gear spirits are underlings of the Modrons, though it wasn't always this way. Not that that has really changed their duties, though. The Modrons dominated them to keep them even more on task than they were before, because gear spirits are capable of wandering away from their gears. Their subservience to the Modrons is something that they're slightly bothered by, seeing as how the gear spirits have more personality and individuality than the Modrons do. Moignos are perhaps the most interesting creatures in Mechanus. They're strange, two-dimensional things that can be found across the plane, though somewhat rarely. They're small, see-through, floating strings of equations, though the older they are, the longer and more complex their equations become, making them more and more opaque. Their role in Mechanus is to perform all the calculations required to allow the Modrons to add more cogs to expand the great machine, and to make sure the whole thing keeps running smoothly. 1,000 years ago, there were no Moignos, and the Modrons were struggling to maintain and expand the plane. But then a great mathematician named Moigno thought up a form of multidimensional living mathematics. The idea was too much for him, so his mind broke into insanity and perhaps death, and his idea, the first Moigno, came out. It spread through the multiverse until it found Mechanus, where it sensed there an opportunity. So it materialized into the three-dimensional world and met the Modrons, who conveyed to it their problem. It promptly created more Moignos and immediately set about reordering the plane. In that moment, the Modrons nearly lost control of Mechanus, but they managed to narrowly avoid disaster by offering the Moignos a mathematical conundrum. You see, as much of a genius as the mortal named Moigno was, he was somehow completely unaware of the existence of pi, and so too were all the Moignos, since they were his idea made manifest. The Moignos immediately became obsessed with pi, determined to find its ultimate value. To thank the Modrons for giving them this mathematical gift, the pursuit of pi, they agreed to perform their bidding. Though of course they still devote most of their processing power to finding pi. And in fact, there's something of a palpable annoyance emanating from the bodies of Moignos, as they wish to devote themselves entirely to finding pi. Moignos can't be harmed physically and are capable of instant teleportation. They can also become invisible by entering the second dimension. As a side note, I don't like these descriptions of entering other dimensions. It seems like the writers are under the impression that two-dimensional space is a different place from three-dimensional space, when really the second dimension is contained within three-dimensional space. So whatever exists in two dimensions also exists in three-dimensional space, but not the other way around. A line exists in a plane, but a plane can't exist in a line, and so on. You could imagine that there is a fourth dimension, and perhaps four-dimensional creatures. They might be able to see us, but we might not be able to see them, or at the very least see all of them. But while a lesser dimensional object is always visible in principle in a higher dimensional space, it doesn't have to be from all angles. Take a sheet of paper as an example. It's technically a three-dimensional object because it has depth, but it doesn't have much depth. So if you position its side completely parallel to you, you can barely see it. So for the Moignos, who are truly two-dimensional creatures, meaning they have no depth, but have the ability to move in three-dimensional space, perhaps their ability to disappear is really them just turning their bodies so that their non-existent depth dimension is facing you. Somebody standing at a different angle will be able to see them, but not you. Or perhaps not. Perhaps they just disappear. Mediators act as the true balancing forces of Mechanus. Well, there are two types of mediators, Mechanus mediators and translator mediators. The translator mediators don't specifically have anything to do with Mechanus. Their job is to deliver the messages of the neutral gods throughout the planes. Mechanus mediators are intelligent, floating beings about 5 feet in diameter that look like clusters of geometric shapes made of strange green crystal. Their role is to ensure that Mechanus remains in balance, that there is an equal measure of light and dark, good and evil, liquid and solid, and so on. They're essentially omnipotent, but they can only use their unlimited powers, which specifically takes the form of unlimited wish spells, for the purpose of balance. There are only 3 Mechanus mediators in existence, and they can't be killed. If you see one, it most likely means that something crazy is about to happen, as they generally enact tremendous change in the name of equilibrium, with not a care at all about how it might affect others, aside from the fact that the balance of the plane will be maintained. For instance, if they determine that there isn't enough liquid in Mechanus, they might show up on the gear you're on and turn the entire landscape into an ocean. Or if they feel there's too much good, they might show up and forcibly change the alignment of everyone nearby to evil. Although I suppose another way they could handle that situation is just by removing the excess good-aligned people from the plane. But the first way is certainly a more frightening example. Parai are strange creatures that take the shape of females in tight-fitting black dresses, with porcelain masks for faces, steel hair, and a glowing orb inside of an open head. The singular of Parai is Parai, and in some ways it might make more sense to refer to them as a singular, because while they are individual creatures physically, they all form a shared consciousness, a hive mind, so it's more like they're all just the bodies of one individual. The glowing orb that fills up their hollow mask is the animating force of a Parai. Once that is killed, the porcelain hands and face crumble away, and the dress falls to the ground, empty. They usually patrol Mechanus in groups of 5, and they seek to make everything perfect, meaning lawful and organized, just like they are. So what this means is they go around hunting for suitable beings to turn into more Parai. They prefer those who have exceptional beauty, strength, or intelligence. When they get close to their victim, the animating light orb leaves its husk and directs the husk to ensnare the victim. Without the orb inside the husk, the porcelain face and hands become extremely sticky, trapping whoever it manages to latch onto. The mask and dress then surround the victim completely and transforms them into one of the Parai. Then the orb of light forms a new husk for itself. The Parai and Modrons are natural enemies, as their visions of perfection don't quite align. The Parai want to turn the Modrons, and the Modrons don't want to be turned. Therefore, Modrons kill them on sight. Inevitables are mostly an invention of 3rd edition, but they're one that I think are pretty cool. Inevitables are terrifying mechanical constructs that exist to uphold the natural laws of the universe, to enforce their inevitability. Each type of inevitable is designed to seek out and punish a particular type of transgression, usually by killing the transgressor, but not always. Once they acquire a target, they single-mindedly focus on hunting them down, no matter how long it might take or what obstacles get in their way, though generally speaking, they won't harm innocents. You can evade the inevitables for a time, but eventually they will find you, which is how they get their name. The justice they mete out is inevitable. After they complete their mission, they wander around as passive observers until they learn of another transgressor to focus on. Inevitables are gold and silver clockwork constructs, with gears and pistons instead of muscles and glowing golden eyes. While inevitables are constructs, they're not exactly unconscious robots. They're intelligent beings that can think and learn and remember. The 3 main types of inevitables are Zelikuts, Kolyaruts, and Maruts. Zelikuts are like mechanical centaurs with alabaster skin. They can shoot chains from their arms and sprout golden metal wings from their backs. They hunt down those who deny justice, such as people who have escaped punishment. Kolyaruts are more human-looking, wearing red robes and golden armor. They also have the most personality of the bunch, though still not much, and are fond of using alter self to hide their mechanical nature and blend in with the crowd before striking. Kolyaruts hunt down those who break bargains and oaths, though they aren't interested in those who break deals accidentally or against their will. Maruts look like onyx statues clad in golden armor, and they represent the inevitability of death, hunting down those who try to escape it through unnatural means, such as liches. But don't worry, you won't be hunted down by a Marut if you resurrect someone, unless you do it repeatedly. If you've got a party member who keeps dying, at a certain point, it might be wise to just let them stay dead. I said that inevitables are mostly an invention of 3rd edition, and that's because Maruts already existed in earlier editions, and were the creations of Rudra, the Vedic god of storms, disease, and death, who does live in Mechanus, so the Maruts were still from here. But Maruts are different in 4th edition. Instead of being from Mechanus, they live in fortresses in the astral plane. There are probably many more types of inevitables that exist, but 3 more types are described within the D&D books: the Quaruts, Verikuts, and Anhydruts. Quaruts look like mechanical humanoids with hourglasses instead of heads, and they hunt down those who have disrupted space and time. Verikuts have an abstract, blocky humanoid shape. They're defenders of the gods, hunting down those who attempt to usurp them. They don't serve any gods in particular, but rather they act on behalf of all gods, knowing that the demise of a god brings only chaos to the universe. You might think that they'd want chaotic gods to be killed, but I suppose you could argue that the death of a chaotic god invites more chaos than the continued existence of one. And if someone is trying to usurp a chaotic god, well, it's not like the number of chaotic gods is going to go down, so they'd rather just preserve the current order of things. Quaruts and Verikuts are some of the most powerful inevitables in existence. Anhydruts, on the other hand, well, they're just weirdly specific. Anhydruts represent the inevitability of the waste and look like giant mechanical scorpions. They hunt down those who transgress against the desert, wherever there is desert, and an anhydrut to protect it. They see a purity in the vast expanses of sand the multiverse contains, and kill those who would try to change the waste by irrigating, farming, or transforming it. 3rd edition really diminished the roles of Modrons and says that inevitables are the more prevalent beings in Mechanus. Inevitables are also a bit different in 5th edition. For one thing, they have a different creator. According to the 3rd edition Player's Guide to Faerun, which isn't canonical to Planescape for the record because it uses the World Tree cosmology, Mystra created the Inevitables. But according to 5th edition, Primus created them. I think this makes more sense. But there is also this 3rd edition book, which says it's unknown who created them. Another big difference is that in 5th edition, only Maruts and Colurets seem to exist, and both have more to do with the city of Sigil than Mechanus. After being created in Mechanus, they go to the Hall of Concordance in Sigil, which is an embassy of pure law where contracts are created. Colurets forge these contracts, and Maruts are the ones that pursue contract breakers. They also look different from edition to edition, and 5th edition makes them seem more mindlessly robotic. And I know challenge rating isn't a reliable indicator of power, and that challenge rating can't be neatly compared from 3rd edition to 5th, but even so, it seems that the Inevitables got a power increase, with Colurets going from CR 12 to 20, and Maruts going from CR 15 to 25. But of course, the most iconic creatures native to Mechanus, and the most numerous, except for in 3rd edition when the writers seem to be laboring under the delusion that they were so stupid that they should be phased out, are the Modrons. Though that's actually not completely true, because while they did limit the information on Modrons in the 3rd edition Manual of the Planes to this small paragraph, they did release a web enhancement for that book all about Modrons, and it does contain some new information, like the Coggles. Coggles are basically living cogs that can speak. They range in size from a few 100 feet to a mile across. They move about the plane as they will, serving as transportation for the Modrons. Modrons are extremely logical, rigid, bureaucratic, and hierarchical living constructs. Except for in 3rd edition, Modrons are essentially the defining creature of Mechanus. They are easily the most numerous beings here. Modron society defines the plane, and in turn, the plane shapes them. Some speculate that the two couldn't exist without each other. Modrons are nearly incomprehensible to non-Modrons. They act as a collective. It's not quite accurate to say they're a hive mind like the Parai are. All Parai share the same consciousness, so interacting with one is truly no different from interacting with another. But with the Modrons, they don't share consciousness, so it's not like one Modron will know what you said to a different Modron. It's only the outsider's inability to adequately understand them that makes one Modron seem interchangeable with any other of the same rank. They certainly all seem to act the same, and they don't seem to exhibit much of a sense of individuality. They all refer to themselves as we. Some people who interact with them have taken to marking them with paint to tell them apart, and the Modrons don't seem to mind or even notice the markings. To understand the Modrons and their society, one must stop thinking like an individual, abandoning all knowledge of the self. It's said that in achieving true understanding of the Modrons, you become a Modron yourself. Each of the major spokes of the Great Wheel has a corresponding major race. Mount Celestia has the Archons, Elysium has the Cardinals, Arborea has the Eladrin, Limbo has the Slod, the Abyss has the Tanari, the Grey Waste has the Yugoloths, the Nine Hells has the Beatezu, the Outlands have the Rilmani, and of course, Mechanus has the Modrons. Fittingly, the Modrons have perhaps the strictest and most orderly hierarchy and path of ascension up the ranks out of all these races. There is only one path and no way to skip ranks, and progression up the ranks isn't really even decided by the Modrons themselves. It's just decided by a rule, and the number of Modrons in each rank is always consistent. Modrons are partially mechanical and partially biological, and generally speaking, become less mechanical and more biological the higher in the hierarchy they are. Though all of the Modrons that have been depicted in 5th edition almost seem to get more mechanical as they go up. And to be honest with you, I think I like that concept a bit more because it represents the imperfection, the impurity of the flesh. To improve ourselves, we must turn into machines, that sort of thing. There are 15 ranks in the Modron hierarchy, and any Modron of the same level looks more or less identical. The hierarchy has two main levels, base Modrons, and hierarch Modrons above them. There are 5 types of base Modrons and 9 types of hierarch Modrons, and then above them, the Primus. In ascending order, the base Modrons are Monodrones, Duodrones, Tridrones, Quadrones, and Pentadrones. The hierarch Modrons are Decatons, Nonatons, Octons, Septons, Hextons, Quintons, Quartons, Tertians, and Secundi, or maybe Secundi, I don't know. There is only one Primus, the One and the Prime. There's 4 Secundi, 9 Tertians, 16 Quartons, 25 Quintons, 36 Hextons, 49 Septons, 64 Octons, 81 Nonatons, and 100 Decatons. The base Modrons are much, much more numerous. There are 500,000 Pentadrones, 1.5 million Quadrones, 6 million Tridrones, 55 million Duodrones, and 300 million Monodrones. But these numbers are minimums. Of course, that's not to say the numbers fluctuate, it's just that whatever the real number is, it's at least that much. Personally, I think the numbers of each rank should maintain some parity with the number of the rank itself. For instance, what does the number 1.5 million have to do with 4, the rank of the Quadrone? Also, I think 300 million Monodrones is a rather small number considering they're supposed to be the most numerous beings on an infinite plane. There are more humans on Earth than that, and Regulus alone might be bigger than Earth. And remember that Modrons aren't just in Mechanus. Enough of them live in Sigil for them to have a dedicated neighborhood, and they can also rarely be found in other planes. So here's my suggestion. We can keep the 500,000 Pentadrones, then for each rank we add a digit and match the starting number to the rank's number. So 4 million Quadrones, 30 million Tridrones, 200 million Duodrones, and 1 billion Monodrones. Or even add 1 digit to each of those numbers. That wouldn't be crazy. Though these numbers are given in 1st edition. 2nd edition Planescape prefers not to provide solid numbers for a lot of the Modrons, keeping them a bit more mysterious, as no scholar has managed to study the Modrons with enough precision as to be able to tabulate them. Modrons pass down orders to the next lowest rank, and any orders a Modron receives from a higher rank are followed through unfailingly. They can only comprehend the existence of Modrons 1 rank above themselves, and they can only communicate with Modrons 1 rank above or below themselves, and of course their own rank. So a Monodrone can't even conceive of the existence of a Tridrone. A Tridrone does have awareness of the Monodrones, but a Monodrone is almost as alien to a Tridrone as a Tridrone is to a Monodrone. So if you think about it, the only Modrons that even know of the existence of Primus are the 4 Secundi, which means Primus is essentially a secret god. But I suppose non-Modrons know about him, though I'm not sure how widespread that knowledge is. Seeing as how understanding of the Modrons is hard to come by, I would expect most people don't know Primus exists, and most who do know only know the name and nothing else. When a Modron of any rank dies, its body rapidly disintegrates, as if it's rusting into nothing over the course of a few seconds, and its essence gets sent back to the Modron energy pool. The nearest Modron, 1 rank down, it doesn't matter which one because they're all effectively the same, gets instantly promoted, and on it goes until you reach the lowest rank, the lowly Monodrone. Depending on what source you prefer, Monodrones then either reproduce by mitosis or get produced in Regulus. The mitosis thing was later retconned, but I kinda like it. Later books say that instead of reproduction by fission, when a Modron dies, a new Monodrone emerges from the energy pool in the center of Regulus. Promotion is something of a traumatic process. Because each rank of Modron has a completely different shape, promotion means a somewhat horrific change into a new shape, and they suddenly gain an understanding of things that were a moment ago completely incomprehensible. As this book puts it, imagine the shock of a duodrone, who knew only of monodrones, duodrones, and tridrones, when it suddenly discovers those inexplicable creatures around it are quadrones and members of its own race. Though since the Modrons get accustomed to this new form and perspective more or less immediately, this transformation is most traumatic for non-Modron observers. Monodrones are the lowliest and most numerous of Modrons. They look like small-ish spheres with 1 eye, wings, and a pair of arms and legs. They're the least intelligent Modrons, only capable of being assigned and carrying out a single function at a time. They're usually tasked with simple labor, though they also make quite the substantial fighting force in great numbers. After all, they don't fear death, will not disobey orders, and will not get exhausted. If you order them to attack, they'll just keep on attacking, even after all the enemies are dead, in which case they'll attack friendly targets. So it's important for duo drones to be around to make sure they get assigned new orders when their current orders are supposed to end. The fact that they can only carry out a single function at a time makes them essentially incapable of reacting to their surroundings. But on the plus side, monodrones don't need to eat or sleep. They gather sustenance from the very air around them. And like all Modrons, they are immune to illusions and all mind-affecting enchantments. Duo drones are bifunctional Modrons. They're blocky, rectangular creatures. They're often tasked with supervising monodrones, typically 12 per duo drone, but they're also used to carry out tasks that are too complex for monodrones to perform, with their capability of carrying out 2 commands at once. Though most of the time they're only given 1 command at a time, which allows them some ability to react. Modrons have their own precise mathematical language, but all Modrons of duodrone rank or higher can also speak the common tongue, though duodrones still aren't very intelligent, so they have limited communication capacity. Tridrones are tri-functional Modrons. They're capable of carrying out multiple task projects, making reports and observations, and doing some limited planning of their own. They receive a general order and then divide it into smaller tasks to be given to the duodrones, and usually each tridrone has 12 duodrone underlings. And unlike duodrones, they can speak normally. In first edition, they looked like 3-sided pyramids with spidery arms and legs, but then in second edition onward, they became an upside-down pyramid. First edition's Modrons were quite basic and goofy looking, and it wasn't until the Planescape campaign setting and Tony Didderlizzi's artwork where they really got their style solidified. And apologies if I said Didderlizzi wrong, I'm not sure how you're supposed to say his name. Quadrones are the upper level of worker Modrons. They're 4-functional, capable of carrying out multiple complex tasks at a time. They often serve as field officers and can react well to unexpected occurrences and have advanced planning capabilities. Quadrones mark the points where Modrons are now actually quite intelligent, more intelligent than the average person. They're cubic Modrons with 4 arms, though sometimes 2 of those arms are wings instead. And that's how pretty much all of the art depicts them, though I think the idea is supposed to be that the winged ones are less common. Quadrones, for whatever reason, are the most likely to go rogue, but I'll talk more about that in a bit. Pentadrones are the highest of the base Modrons. They serve as the Modron police force and act as the intermediaries between the base and hierarch Modrons. Modron armies contain elite units of 12 pentadrones, while other pentadrones command regiments of lesser Modrons. They can emit a gas from their bodies that paralyzes enemies, but can also be used to make the pentadrone levitate. They're extremely resilient, being able to withstand extreme temperatures. Pentadrones supposedly resemble starfish on stilts, but I think they look almost plant-like. Decatons are the lowest of the hierarch Modrons, which are the officials of Modron society. Decatons oversee the physical welfare of the base Modrons. The Modron realm of Regulus has 64 sectors. There's 1 Decaton per sector, and then 1 Decaton for each of the 36 legions of the Modron army. Decatons look like spheres with 10 tentacles and stumpy legs. They can fly by generating a buoyant gas within their bodies, making them lighter than air. Nonatons act as the chief inspectors of Modron society. 9 of them carry out the orders of the Octons, 64 regulate the actions of the Decatons, and 8 of them monitor the Decatons of the Modron army. Nonatons head the investigations of rogue Modrons and lead the units that respond to invasions from other planes. In first edition, and some of second edition, they're cylindrical, but then that was changed to them looking more like huge, one-eyed caterpillar people. Octons are the governors of Modron society. There's 1 in charge of each sector in Regulus. Each Octon has a personal staff of 1 Nonaton, who commands 1 Decaton, who commands 5 Pentadrones, then 16 Quadrones, 81 Tridrones, 256 Duodrones, and 17,280 Monodrones. There's 1 tower in each sector for the Octon in its staff. These towers are smaller versions of the towers used by the Quartons, which are smaller versions of the towers used by the Secundi, which are smaller versions of the tower used by Primus. But of course, the Octons don't know that. Octons have been depicted as humanoids with large collars around their necks encircled with 8 tentacles, later as boxy figures with tentacles, and in 5th edition as mechanical octopus guys. Octons force air or liquid out through the bottom of the collar, allowing them to swim or fly easily. Septons act as inspectors and examiners, traveling from place to place to ensure that all regulations are being obeyed. They bring orders from outlying areas to the Octon towers and transfer information between the other towers as well. Septons are powerful spellcasters and have 7 senses that are continuously operating: hearing, sight, smell, taste, touch, ESP, and detect magic. Septons are bald humanoids with collars similar to that of the Octons, though smaller, gear-shaped, and with 7 arms around it, though 5th edition changes this up, making them look like robots with 2 main arms, with lesser arms coming off the main ones. Hextons are the generals of the Modron armies, 1 for each of the 36 legions, though they also serve other functions, like serving at Primus's tower or maintaining the chain of command from Quinton to Septon. In older editions, they look like humanoids with 6 arms, 2 of which are human arms with 6 fingers each, and 4 of which are tentacles tipped with claws. They also have wings. 5th edition makes them into hulking robots. Quintons act as the major bureau chiefs and record keepers of Mechanus. There are 5 bureaus in Primus's tower, and several more scattered throughout the sectors of Regulus. Quintons look like tall humanoids with 4 flexible arms coming out of their shoulders and prehensile tails that act as their 5th arm. They also have wings and a diamond inscribed on their foreheads. Though, as you've seen, these descriptions from the Planescape campaign setting box set seem to have been copied over from 1st edition before the 2nd edition drawings of these Modrons were made, so the 2nd edition drawings often don't exactly match. The 64 sectors of Regulus are divided up into 16 regions. Quartons are the ones who rule over these regions. Quartons oversee the bureaus, sector governments, and armies within those regions. Each Quarton has a guard of 35 Pentadrones, though of course the Pentadrones have no idea what it is they're guarding. Quartons are 12-foot-tall humanoids with fan-like wings and 4 arms. Tertians are the judges of Modron society. They supervise the Quartons and rule the courts of Regulus, hearing all crimes that fall under the jurisdiction of the realm, and even crimes that occur in other regions of Mechanus, as one of the most likely spots any violators of the law will be brought is Regulus. Because Modron society is practically the epitome of orderliness, infractions by Modrons aren't very common. At least when you think about it in percentages. The fact that there's so many Modrons means that even a small percentage of misbehavior means the courts probably have daily activity. The cases Tertians preside over usually deal with rogue Modrons and outsiders. When lesser Modrons are brought before Tertians for judgment, they truly have no idea what is going on. Without any understanding or knowledge of the existence of Tertians, it seems as though some alien, incomprehensible manifestation of logic itself is passing judgment on them. Tertians look fairly human, except they're 12 feet tall and have horns and long prehensile tails that end in a mace-like ball with which they can paralyze people. The penultimate rank of Modron is the Secundus, or Secundi or Secundi when it's plural. Just like how the 64 sectors are divided into 16 regions, the 16 regions are further divided into 4 quarters. The Secundi act as the viceroys of these quarters. They are the virtual rulers of the Modrons, reporting only to Primus. Secundi are very powerful beings, with the ability to permanently stun their enemies, at least until they decide to release them. Secundi look like incredibly thin and tall humanoids with long, narrow faces. Earlier, I said that Mechanus doesn't exist in 4th edition for the most part. And the reason I said for the most part is because it wasn't included in the main 4th edition books. In fact, it was included in a magazine. In 2012, as the writers of D&D were creating 5th edition, they began reintroducing elements that they had eschewed in 4th edition's World Access cosmology. One of those things was Mechanus and the Modrons. In past editions, the story was basically that Modrons had existed for so long that they had no origin story. And if they did, it was probably just that they came into existence at the same time that Mechanus did. Well, in a 2012 edition of Dragon Magazine, the Modrons got an origin story. It's not completely compatible with Planescape, as it's still ultimately based in the World Access cosmology, but it's interesting enough that it's worth telling you now. In the Great Wheel cosmology, the opposite of Mechanus is Limbo, the plane of sheer chaos. But in 4th edition, its opposite is the Far Realm, the realm of indescribable, unknowable, insanity-inducing Lovecraftian horrors beyond reality. At the beginning of time, there were the primordials, the elemental chaos, and the Far Realm. The primordials were essentially the gods before there were gods, and in the age of creation, they shaped worlds out of the elemental chaos. But without a grounding in order, these worlds were fleeting things, incapable of any permanency. That is, until one primordial, named the Prime Architect, glimpsed something beyond the elemental chaos, a realm of perfect order and harmony, known as the Accordant Expanse. The Prime Architect, inspired by this realm of perfection, reshaped the elemental chaos to form the inner planes, regions of stability that could act as the building blocks of all the worlds that the primordials might wish to create. But soon after this feat was accomplished, the Prime Architect watched in horror as one of the newly created worlds was devoured by a mass of tendrils clawing its way out of the Far Realm. This aberration was called the Nine-Tongued Worm. The Prime Architect defeated it in battle, but was mortally wounded in the process. In its final act, it called upon the power of the Accordant Expanse and surrendered its life force to it, transforming into innumerable mechanical life forms, the Modrons. They quickly spread across the cosmos to seal the breaches in reality leading to the Far Realm. Once this was done, they entered the Accordant Expanse and created the realm of Mechanus. So I guess according to this lore, the Accordant Expanse is the opposite of the Far Realm, and Mechanus is a region within the Accordant Expanse. Anyway, it took the Modrons 289 years to finish construction on the clockwork metropolis of Regulus. Once they were done, the 4 Secundi immersed themselves in the energy pool they had built in the center, and from the pool rose the Prime Architect reborn, Primus, the One and the Prime. Primus is the god and ultimate ruler of Regulus and the Modrons. In earlier 1st edition, Primus was actually the ruler of all of Mechanus. Primus alone understands the whole structure of the Modron race, and all other Modrons exist to obey the One and the Prime. And if there's one creature who understands the whole of Mechanus, what the gears are for, what the secret of the great machine is, it's Primus. Primus lives at the center of Regulus, in an immense tower known as Primus's Tower, or according to at least one source, the Great Modron Cathedral. Primus is a huge, emotionless being who rises from an energy pool in the center of this tower, the same energy pool that seems to be the nexus of the collective Modron life force. In 4th edition, this energy pool is actually made from a psychomorphic substance that can only be found in the Accordant Expanse. It's like a jelly. In this edition, Modrons of any rank don't require food or air, and instead they get sustenance by smearing themselves with a small amount of this luminescent jelly. Modron laborers collect the stuff and store it in Primus's pool. Primus has 2 forms. One form is a gigantic, and some sources claim gold-skinned being half submerged in the pool. Both its hands are unseen, one bathed in bright rainbow light, and the other concealed in dark clouds. Being touched by the rainbow hand teleports you to Arcadia, while being touched by the dark hand teleports you to Acheron. Primus's other form is that of a basically regularly sized androgynous human. Primus is connected to a latticework of waxy strands called the Infinity Web. This web provides information from throughout all of Mechanus, and to a somewhat lesser extent through the entire multiverse. With the Infinity Web, Primus can see through the eyes of any Modron, and since Primus tasks Modrons with observing the actions of creatures all throughout the multiverse, Primus's vision and knowledge is equal to, or perhaps greater than, any being in existence. It's said that all Modrons are one, and in a way, this appears to be true. As I said before, they don't share a consciousness, but they seem to share an essence, Primus's essence. Not only because new Modrons spawn out of Primus's energy pool, that is, if you accept the anti-monodrone mitosis retcon, but also because on the exceedingly rare occasions when Primus dies, he doesn't truly die, but rather one of the 4 Secundii steps into the energy pool and ascends as Primus Reborn. In 4th edition, this occasion isn't so rare, but is actually part of the regularly scheduled maintenance of Modron society. The Primus's death is just part of the process, and happens either every cycle or grand cycle. A cycle is the time it takes for the largest gear in Mechanus, which is in Regulus, and takes 17 years, to turn. A grand cycle is 17 cycles, so 289 years. This 4th edition source does say cycle, but I find it kind of hard to believe that's intended. Once every 17 years seems like an awfully fast succession rate for a god. Honestly, even once every 289 years seems fast for an otherwise immortal being of immense power. But in any case, whether Primus's death is cyclical or not, it's one of the rare moments where chaos briefly enters the strictly regulated world of the Modrons en masse, as the 4 Secundii must decide among them who will become the next Primus. Normally, they all get along in perfect harmony, but not when the matter of succession is at hand. The first act of the new Primus is always to restore order to the Modrons. Of course, disorder still crops up in Modron society from time to time. For whatever reason, not every Modron obeys its orders. Some Modrons stumble across a little bit of individuality, or go crazy, or even turn violent towards other Modrons. These are the rogue Modrons. There are a few reasons this can happen, and a few more speculations of reasons this can happen. Of course, taking the entirety of Modron society into view, this happens extremely infrequently. But still, even if it happens to just 0.05% of all Modrons, that would be hundreds of thousands of rogues. Sometimes a command gets misinterpreted, and 2 contradictory orders pass through 2 separate chains of command and get delivered to the same Modron. What's a Modron to do when given with 2 contradictory commands from its unquestionable superiors? Usually, they go insane. Maybe they get caught in an endless, nonsensical loop trying to carry out both commands at once, or maybe they give up and abandon their duties. Maybe in that moment of impossibility, the absurdity of their entire existence dawns on them, and they leave Mechanus to become a rice farmer in Elysium. This reason for going rogue most often happens to those who have many superiors. Another thing that can cause Modrons to go rogue is too much exposure to chaos, like by spending too much time in limbo. In a similar vein, Modrons who spend too much time alone are more likely to go rogue. After all, Modron society is all about the collective. Perhaps for one to continue to find society and their role in it important, that idea has to be constantly reinforced and pressed into them. Stepping away from it all for a while provides a new perspective, even for a Modron. Some speculate that Modrons going rogue is actually an intended part of Primus's plans, that Primus plants the seeds of disobedience in a select few Modrons on purpose for some unknown ends, perhaps to gain a further understanding of the universe. While most Modrons who go rogue prefer to go off and explore their newfound individuality, they do retain their authority over lesser Modrons, and so some remain within Modron society in secret. After all, there's nothing to tell apart a regular Modron from a rogue Modron aside from its behavior, so a particularly crafty rogue Modron could hide in plain sight, working towards its own individual plans, whatever they might be. Since rogues are so capable of wreaking havoc in this way, Modrons go to great extents to hunt down and destroy rogues. Modrons have no real concept of evil, but nonetheless, to them, rogue Modrons are evil. Typically, Tridrones and lower ranks don't possess the self-awareness to realize they've gone rogue until it's too late, and they're escorted off to court for judgment and destruction. But Quadrones in higher ranks are capable of recognizing that they've become rogues. Every once in a great while, a rogue Modron, rather than being destroyed, will be approved for exile. Their bond to the energy pool is broken, and they're transformed into a state that resembles a Quadrone. So perhaps the reason that most rogues appear to be Quadrones isn't because they really are Quadrones, but merely because they look like Quadrones. Some believe that applications for exile are approved by Primus personally, so that some rogue Modrons can explore the planes free of the rigidity of Modron society. It's said that Modrons look for law in everything, even chaos. And so maybe Primus creates these rogue Modrons in an attempt to find deeper order within their chaos. One example of a rogue Modron is Ilem, who lives in Sigil. Ilem is a monodrone who turned rogue because he got injected with slod eggs, which normally kill the host. But in this case, he merged with the slod eggs, and the chaotic influence of them caused him to transform and altered his mind, making him smarter, but also a bit crazy. It's thought that rogue Modrons are never of Quarton rank or higher, but curiously, there is actually a rogue Secundus living in the 5th layer of Mount Celestia, in Rempha, the city of the Sands of Time. This Secundus, who rules the city, is called the Clockmaker, and built a portal to the demiplane of time there, which either caused the city's strange relationship with time or was inspired by it. You see, in Rempha, time flows backward, forward, and sideways. When I described this city in my Guide to Mount Celestia video, I figured that the existence of the Clockmaker must mean that there are at least 5 Secundi, not 4. But now that I think about it, due to the city's weird relationship with time, it's possible that the Clockmaker is the very same as one of the other currently existing Secundi, but from the future. Now that you know all about Modrons, there just remains one facet of their society for me to elucidate, and that is the Great Modron March, which is without a doubt the largest and most public event the Modrons undertake, and likely the largest event in the entirety of the Outer Planes. Every 289 years, or 17 rotations of the largest gear in Mechanus, which is called a Grand Cycle, the Modrons venture out of Mechanus in a gigantic horde. Though this book says it happens every cycle, which is 17 years. That's either a mistake or was later retconned. And this book says that a Grand Cycle is 17 years, and that the march happens every 17th Grand Cycle. D&D needs to get its shit together. But anyway, the Great Modron March is when the Modrons go on a tour of all the Outer Planes, though some might call it a rampage, as the march ironically causes a great deal of chaos as an army of Modrons tramples over anything on their path. And some might call it a parade and see it as a time for celebration. As the march goes on, people start to follow it around, if for no other reason than to participate in the monumental occasion. The march goes clockwise around the Great Ring, weaving from the gate towns of the Outlands to the planes they lead to the next plane on the ring, then to that plane's gate town, repeating the cycle, so they end up visiting every plane and every gate town. While they travel through the upper planes, they typically generate a horde of followers, but inevitably, as they enter the lower planes, these followers abandon the march or get killed by fiends. The Great Modron March is made up of at least several thousand Modrons, but it could be hundreds of thousands or even millions of them. It's enough that the whole of the Outer Planes seems to take notice. As soon as a march begins, the gate towns have to prepare themselves for the inevitable arrival of the Modrons in order to minimize the chaos, as the Modrons do not care what's in their way. The gate town to Mechanus is the only one that's permanently prepared. No matter how many Modrons are involved in the march, huge quantities of them die or get lost or stranded along the way. While the general path the Modrons take is always the same, the details of that path are unpredictable. It's presumed that the path they take has been worked out by the Modrons to be the best path, whatever that may be. Sometimes they take the shortest, most direct path between two places, and sometimes their path is nonsensically winding. This is one of the reasons there are so many casualties. Sometimes the march comes along a chasm, and rather than find a way around it, they just go right over it, ordering hundreds of monodrones to form a bridge with their bodies. Naturally, those who are part of the bridge won't have much of a chance of getting across the chasm themselves, but a big reason for casualties is the lower planes. As they pass through, the fiends attack the Modrons every step of the way, and the march never stops for any reason, at least not until they arrive back in Mechanus to finish the thing. Monodrones don't need to eat or sleep, but the more intelligent Modrons do. They push themselves to their absolute limit while on the march, and when sleep is absolutely necessary, they get carried on litters by Monodrones and Duodrones, who also presumably don't need sleep. While they march, the Modrons don't really do anything except observe their surroundings as they go. This has led many to believe that the march is how the Modrons gather information about the planes. Others, using the theory that Mechanus is the machinery of the multiverse, go one step further, speculating that the Great Modron March makes observations in order to retune and recalibrate the gears, perhaps just to keep things running smoothly, or perhaps to influence the turnings of the multiverse in their favor. Maybe they readjust the gears of Mechanus in order to alter the future course of events across the planes. Then they go out 289 years later to check that their alterations had the intended effect, and to make more, step by step, slowly leading us all to the future Primus wants. Another theory is that the Great Modron March filters out the weak Modrons, and that every march strengthens Modron society. Perhaps then, when the essence of a Modron returns to the energy pool, it comes back just a bit better than before, having learned something from its death. Although that's not to say that the Modron that just got formed from the energy pool is the same one or shares the same stream of consciousness as the one that just died. But perhaps in their death they contribute something to the Modron energy pool. I would expect at the very least information that is used in the creation of new Modrons. 4th edition's once per grand cycle succession of the Primus, if it is meant to be once per grand cycle, aligns with the timing of the Great Modron March, which would suggest another few possible reasons for the march. Perhaps the march is a funeral procession, a declaration to the planes that the Primus is dead, long live the Primus. Perhaps the march is the first act of the new Primus, an information-gathering routine so that the new Primus can get its bearings and update the Infinity Web. Maybe all those Modrons who get lost or wind up abandoned throughout the planes are intentional plants. Perhaps the new Primus wishes for a soft reboot of Modron society, purposefully sending hundreds of thousands of Modrons off to die so that a fresh batch, maybe more attuned to the new Primus, can be born. Though 4th edition does give one more possible reason, as Modrons have been observed sealing off planar portals along their route, so perhaps the march is their routine maintenance and inspection of the outer planes to prevent the far realm from seeping in. The Great Modron March is central to more than one D&D adventure, and it plays a very small role in Out of the Abyss, where characters can find a group of lost Modrons in the Underdark. The 5th edition Planescape adventure, The Turn of Fortune's Wheel, has the players trying to find a contingent of the latest march that went missing somewhere in the Outlands. And this adventure really does make it clear that the march is used to recalibrate Mechanus and the outer planes as a whole, because depending on what actions the players choose at the end of the adventure, the Modrons can end up with a very skewed sense of what the outer planes are like, leading them to drastic action to correct the perceived chaos. The Great Modron March from The Turn of Fortune's Wheel, it seems, was the same one detailed in the 2nd edition Planescape adventure collection titled The Great Modron March. This march was out of the ordinary, mostly because it came early, about 189 years early. If you've seen my Guide to the Abyss video, you might remember that as of 2nd edition Planescape, the demon lord Orcus is dead. He was slain and overthrown by Kier Ransely, the drow goddess of vengeance and undeath. Though he died, a part of him lived on as a shadowy vestige named Tenebris. In order to regain his former power, and hopefully gain some more, he needed to reclaim his magical artifact, the Wand of Orcus. He killed Primus through the use of an ancient magic known as the Last Word, and took Primus's place for a time in order to make use of the Infinity Web. He sent forth an extremely premature Great Modron March to scour the plains and find the wand. Once he found it, he left Mechanus, and according to 3rd edition, he left a taint behind. His dark energies corrupted one of the Secundi, and with him over 1 million Modrons. The tainted Secundus tried to become the next Primus, but the other 3 Secundi rejected him. He took his tainted Modrons and fled to Acheron, promising to build an army strong enough to take Regulus by force. And that makes 2 rogue Secundi. This crippling of Modron society is meant to explain why 3rd edition reduced the presence and importance of the Modrons so severely, and mostly replaced them with Formians and Inevitables. As with all the planes, magic works differently on Mechanus. Some schools of magic are enhanced or altered, while others are completely nullified. The most obvious effect is that wild magic simply doesn't work here. The lawful nature of the plane just doesn't allow it. But it's not just wild magic. Illusion doesn't work either. The school of divination can go either way, depending on the alignment of the spellcaster. If you're chaotic, divination doesn't work at all. If you're lawful, it works normally. That makes me wonder what happens if you're neutral. Maybe it works, but just kind of badly. DM's choice, I guess. Necromancy is seen by Mechanus as a violation, or at least a bending of the laws of nature, making it difficult to use here. To cast a necromancy spell successfully, a spellcaster must sacrifice their flesh and blood as a spell component, which in game terms just means that you have to lose hit points. The higher level the spell, the more hit points it costs. Conjuration and elemental magic are a bit more involved. The effect Mechanus imposes on conjuration has its pros and cons. The pro is that anything summoned is a perfect slave, with no choice but to obey the spellcaster. And while that sounds sinister, I would imagine that that's what people who do conjuration want. A con is that only lawful creatures can be summoned, though they can be good, evil, or neutral. Another con is that the creature you summon will be less useful to you if your alignment doesn't match the creature's. If your alignment is opposite, so either if you're chaotic or if you're good and the creature you summon is evil, or vice versa, the creature will only obey the letter of the command, not the spirit. In other words, they follow the rules as written, not the rules as intended, which can get frustrating. If your alignment is similar but not the same, so for example, if you're lawful good and you summon a lawful neutral creature, they'll apply some interpretation to the command. But if your alignment matches, the summoned creature will follow your orders just as you intended them to be followed. Elemental magic requires you to make use of the relevant element as a spell component. So for an air spell, you have to breathe across your hand or the other components. To cast a fire spell, you have to strike a spark from one of the cogs while casting. Casting a water spell requires you to spray some water into the air before the spell will work. And for earth, you have to throw a handful of dirt native to Mechanus into the air. Though while there is dirt in Mechanus, it's not as common as in most of the other planes, so cogwheel dust also counts. Of course, taking all these things into consideration, on top of your normal spell components, just to cast a spell can be cumbersome. And still, there are some spells you just can't cast. Well, not to worry, as there is a way around this, and that's through the use of spell keys, which are plane-specific objects or sometimes immaterial things that can be used to restore magic to its normal functionality. In some planes, the spell keys are so numerous or varied or complex that they're hardly any better than just not using them. But the spell keys of Mechanus are quite simple. Well, it depends on what source book's ideas you like better. This earlier book says that the spell keys of Mechanus are equations, formulas that alter the nature of the universe ever so slightly. But this book changes that and says that there are two types of spell keys, which restore entire schools of magic, rather than restoring specific spells or spell levels, as spell keys are sometimes known to do. The first type of spell key is 1/12 of a regular-sized cog, so not a landmass-sized cog, marked with a sigil of the spell school and colored appropriately. There's one for each spell school, including the elemental schools, which in newer editions, like 5th edition, aren't considered their own school. But these key cogs don't include necromancy. These cog pieces can be joined together to create a whole cog. Naturally, any wizard planning on spending any substantial amount of time in Mechanus will want to get a full cog. What's cool about the Mechanus cog key is that once it's been fully formed, you can press it into your skin, where it will be absorbed, leaving behind a cog-shaped tattoo. And this isn't just for looks. Doing this allows you to cast any spell at will while within Mechanus, but all spells you cast while outside Mechanus will function at half effectiveness. This can never be undone, so make your choice wisely. And if you think about it, this means that Mechanus is probably actually a pretty dangerous place to go, because you would think that of the mathematicians and the governors, there's plenty of wizards who have done this and just can cast spell after spell after spell. The other type of spell key is for necromancy. It's a piece of a Modron and a formula muttered in the direction of the realm of Shang-Ti. The formula is kept well hidden, though. because necromancy is viewed as a twisting of the law. Generally speaking, the outer planes are not easy to get to. Average people from the prime material plane don't come here very often. It's mostly just the adventuring types that do, whether purposefully or as an unintended consequence of meddling with powerful forces. So how's an adventurer to get to Mechanus? Well, there are your usual options. If you've got a high-level spellcaster friend or you are one yourself, then spells like Plane Shift or Gates are your best bets. But you might also come into possession of magical items that enable interplanar travel, such as cubic gates, rods of passage, amulets of the planes, those sorts of things. Another popular method of getting to the outer planes is by using astral projection, and then traveling through the astral plane through a color pool to Mechanus. The ones to Mechanus have a diamond color, by the way, and most of them go to Regulus. Though this method can be risky, as you're leaving your physical body vulnerable. Plus, if the silver cord that tethers your physical body to your projection is cut, you die. Though the silver cord is intangible to most things. One example of an exception are the silver swords of the Githyanki, so try not to run into any of them while you're astral projecting. But once your projection makes it through the color pool, your physical body comes along for the ride. So hopefully it's only a brief window of danger, and it's probably safer than traveling through the astral plane physically. Those are the most reliable ways to get to Mechanus from the prime material plane, though there does exist some conduits and portals that can be found here and there, mostly in places where the gods that reside in Mechanus are worshipped, such as the Babylonian god Anu. Whenever he leaves his realm, a conduit known as Anu's Way bridges Mechanus and the prime material. Portals to the prime material plane usually exist in the center of the top side of a cog. Naturally, it's a lot easier to get to Mechanus if you're coming from somewhere else in the outer planes. The city of Sigil is full of portals to other planes. Many of them are undocumented ones that you may just happen across, but others are well known. The Fraternity of Order controls such a portal in the city court, their headquarters in Sigil. If you're a member of the governors, you can use it. Otherwise, you'll probably have to do them a favor before they grant you access, if they grant you access at all. But there's also a gate to Mechanus whose location shifts between the various scrap heaps of the city, commonly found near the Great Foundry in the lower ward. Otherwise, it's always easiest to get to a plane that neighbors the one you're already in, and for Mechanus that would be Arcadia and Acheron. In Mechanus, portals appear as cog-like circles. The ones to Arcadia are a light green, while the ones to Acheron are deep red. These are quite widespread throughout the plane, with 1st edition claiming there's one on every gear, though they only open once per revolution of whatever gear they're on, remaining open for a day. But while they are widespread, Primus keeps a close watch on these portals, not wanting too much interference and influence from the other planes getting in. And remember that the Labyrinthian portal is a network that only connects places throughout Mechanus, not beyond Mechanus, so portals to the other planes are not a part of it. And Mechanus isn't connected to most of the great paths, such as the River Styx, the River Oceanus, Yggdrasil, or Mount Olympus. It does connect to the Infinite Staircase, but that's to be expected. So Mechanus might be as hard to get to as Bitopia. I will mention one other portal, if only to bring up a point of discussion, and that's the portal to the plane of Earth. But it's just a one-way portal, so it's not going to get you here. I bring it up because in my last video, the Guide to Bitopia, I talked about how the outer planes and the inner planes are not connected. The books specifically say that the outer planes are cut off from the inner planes, and magic that draws upon the power of the astral or outer planes doesn't work in the ethereal or inner planes, and vice versa. To me, these planes being cut off from each other would suggest that portals between them don't exist. And yet, there are multiple examples of such portals existing. One commenter on that video pointed out the possibility that perhaps the lack of connection between the inner and outer planes only affects spellcasting, and portals are a different matter entirely. It is a compelling idea, but I'm not so sure. I think it may just come down to an inconsistency in the writing, as throughout these videos I've already pointed out plenty of those, so we know they're not in short supply. But I'll let you be the judge of this one. But back to the matter at hand, maybe you think all of these methods of getting to Mechanus are too difficult or too rare. Well, I've got a foolproof suggestion for you. Live your life as lawfully as you can, eschewing all notions of goodness and evil, and then die. If you do it right, that's a surefire way to end up in Mechanus. Just make sure you don't take a patron deity that resides in some other plane. And come to think of it, that's actually a pretty good way to get to Mechanus too. Just worship a god who lives here fervently. However, then you kind of run into the problem of being a petitioner of a realm rather than the plane as a whole, which I'm sure restricts your freedom of movement to a degree. So, the choice is yours. Depending on what cosmology you take as canon, the spirits of the recently deceased may first go to the fugue plane, rather than going straight to their outer plane. But that idea isn't very Planescape, and I've already discussed it extensively elsewhere. So seeing as you're watching this video, that's probably a good indication that you take Planescape cosmology as canon, in which case, the fugue plane doesn't exist. If you were lawful in life, but skewed a bit toward goodness, you'd go to Arcadia. If you were lawful but skewed a bit toward evil, you'd go to Acheron. But if you were unwaveringly lawful, though I imagine there to be a degree of wiggle room there so that you don't literally have to have 0% good or evil in you, you go to Mechanus. Though something I feel like I don't stress enough in these videos is that your lawful alignment might not be strong enough to end up in any of these three planes, placing you closer to true neutrality than to any other alignment, in which case you'd go to the Outlands. Like with the wiggle room that I just mentioned, I would imagine that there's some threshold value for any given alignment, over which you're one alignment, such as lawful neutral, and under which you're another alignment, such as true neutral. But there is, of course, another way to get to Mechanus, though certainly not the easiest way, as it involves a lot of bureaucratic hullabaloo, and that's through the portal from the plane's gate town in the Outlands. The Outlands is home to 16 gate towns, one leading to each of the other outer planes. The gate towns are typically miniature reflections of the planes they lead to, though if they become too similar, they'll end up getting pulled into that plane. So there's usually at least a few things that are keeping any given gate town from cosmic realignment. And that holds true for Automata. Automata, for the most part, is an extremely orderly town, too much so for many people's tastes. It can seem more like a machine than a living place. It's so orderly that it's physically impossible to get lost, though finding a specific building is a different matter, as most of the buildings look like carbon copies of one another. The blocks are arranged in a perfect grid, with all buildings of the same type on the same block. The houses are spaced out at exact intervals, the city watch patrols on an unwavering schedule, and everyone rises at dawn and retires at dusk. There are laws for everything here. Whatever you want to do in Automata, you probably need a permit for it. And to get a permit, you probably need to wait in a long line to fill out a bunch of paperwork, and then wait in a different line to fill out some more paperwork, and then a few more for good measure. And if you mess up on any of that paperwork, or if any of it's considered illegible by the person working the desk, well, you've got to restart the whole process. And there are plenty of things that you can't get a permit for. They're just plain against the rules. You've got to watch where you step, what you say, what you drink, and even when you drink, and so on. For many of the citizens, this is great, but many others rebel against such rigidity. A place so orderly has to be balanced out by some disorder to stay in the Outlands. Automata has a secret criminal underground, imaginatively named the Underground. It's a place of twisting passageways, concealed layers, and forbidden temples. This is where all the chaotic folks go, and where the nightlife is. It's got hidden gladiator arenas, fest halls featuring the most extravagant and depraved debauchery, and enough fiends to crumple even an Archon's panties. Many of the citizens of Automata are actually petitioners from Mechanus, hoping to make Automata so lawful that it slides into Mechanus. They're easy to spot, as they all wear the same red-gray robes. The rest of the citizens are mostly humans and Modrons. Unsurprisingly, the government of the town mostly employs governors, and Automata's got a lot of government. In 5th edition, things are a bit different. First off, the extreme orderliness of the place is something that's actually baffling to non-lawful types, with such indistinguishable streets and buildings that only a Modron could find it intuitive. The criminal underground is given a new name, the Inverse, and it's a bit cooler than its 2nd edition counterpart. Rather than just being a chaotic jumble of underground passageways and caverns, it's an upside-down, chaotic, steampunk reflection of the city above. 30 feet down below the surface, gravity reverses, and you start climbing up to the inverse. I like to imagine that even though gravity is keeping you on the floor, you still feel like you're upside down. And judging by this artwork, that might be the intention. While it still is the place the criminals gather, it's mostly populated by freethinkers and anarchists, only labeled as criminals due to the absolute preponderance of unnecessary laws that Automata has put in place. Automata is ruled by the Council of Order, a triumvirate of officials representing 3 important facets of society. A Githzerai named Artemis, or Aristomus in 5th edition, represents the town guard. Pelnis the Clockmaker is a human who represents the craftsman, and boy does he have an unfortunate name. And a tiefling named Seraphil represents the temple district. You might not be surprised to learn that 5th edition replaces good old Pelnis with a Modron, an Octon named Juliet 314, who oversees commerce and acts as the town's supreme auditor. Her being an Octon makes me wonder if she's an extra Octon, or if she also has responsibilities within Regulus. Either way, nothing officially gets done in Automata without the council's say-so. So whatever long and drawn-out process you have to go through to accomplish something here is all for naught if the council doesn't give it their stamp of approval. But mirroring the Council of Order is the Council of Anarchy. They're a secret and illegal council that rules the criminal underground, or the inverse. In 5th edition, the council is comprised of 3 rogue Decaton Modrons. In 2nd edition, there's a Githzerai named Legis Scrog, who represents the criminals, a human named Ravis Quarkunkel, or perhaps Quarconsul, who represents the vagrants, and an Erinyes named Auroch the Fair, who represents the fiends. And nothing illegal gets done in the town without their say-so. Seeing as nearly every building looks the same, there aren't that many places of note in Automata. But there are a few. The Hall of Order is the most important of the town's many, many government buildings, as it's where the Council of Order resides. There's also a Hall of Disorder directly below it in the inverse. It's a farcical court where the council judges the accused based on the absurdity of their defense. The more illogical the argument, the lighter the penalty. And if you're looking for a way into the inverse, or the underground, the most well-known entrance is contained in one of the stable companies on the Street of Stables. It's called McGovell's Stabling Establishment, and the entrance is a circular staircase leading downward. It's sealed off in the daytime, though, and it's not that secret, so if somebody lawful sees you go down, you're getting put on a list. The best inn in town is the Divine Machine, run by Torlach the Halfling, or Belda Beanfoot in 5th edition. Things are a bit small there, as it's run by a halfling, but it is comfortable, and it's a popular spot to stay for people awaiting clearance for gate travel. In 5th edition, it's also got a first-floor coffee shop with monodrone baristas known as the Congruent Cafe, but since monodrones can only perform one task at a time, service is a bit slow. The gate to Mechanus sits in the heart of Automata. It's in the shape of a giant gear. Well, giant by normal gear standards, not at all giant compared to the gear landmasses of Mechanus. Basically, it's big enough for a train to go through, and a train does indeed go through it. The gate is double-sided, and on one side of the gate is a big open plaza called Modron Way. Built up around the other side of the gate is the Concord Terminus, a resplendent train station for the Concordant Express, the interplanar train operated by Modrons. It originates in Regulus, goes through to Automata, and further stops beyond, but those aren't specified. The station is overseen by a Nonaton Modron called the Timekeeper, and as you'd expect, the train is never early, and it is never late. According to 5th edition, the gate to Mechanus is ever turning, ticking in time with the gears of the plane. The footsteps of guards marching down the street, the chirping of birds, workers hammering nails, and other such sounds are all synchronized with the gate's ticking, acting as a giant metronome for the whole town. Normally, gate towns act as an accessible way to get to a plane. But that's less the case in Automata than other gate towns, and that's because of all the town's strict laws and lengthy, tedious procedures. The Turn of Fortune's Wheel adventure, which tasks players with approaching the gate to Mechanus, says that it takes an average of 26 hours of waiting in lines and answering questions before you can get the forms you need to fill out to reach the gate. Then 2.5 days to fill out the halfling-sized stack of forms, and great attention to detail to do it without making a mistake, followed by an average of 19 hours waiting in line to actually reach the gate. But that's if you do it the legal way. because the gate is only well guarded by day. So if you were to try sneaking in without a permit, night's the time to do it. Though of course that conflicts a bit with 5th edition's 19-hour-long line for the gate. If it's 19 hours, then it necessarily is still there at nighttime. So I suppose you've just got to decide which version of Automata you like better, the one without nighttime activity or the one with 19-hour lines. You could merge them though. I kind of like the idea that the lines are incredibly long, and anybody who doesn't get through the line by dusk has to leave and come back in the morning, which of course could mean that you end up further back in the line than you just were the night before. But once you actually go through the gate, it doesn't always lead you to the same place. Automata's gate has an ever-shifting destination in Mechanus, and there's a whole department of the town's government that constantly calculates the drop-off point. Hopefully their calculations are correct when you enter the portal, or you might end up somewhere entirely unexpected. In my past videos, I've given each layer its own section, but I'm structuring things a bit differently here because, as I've said, Mechanus can either be said to have just one layer or an infinite amount of contiguous layers. I prefer the first view, and a strong point in its favor is that the cogs are individually finite, whereas layers in Planescape are infinite. And it being just one layer also seems to be what Planescape itself settled on. The original Planescape campaign setting box set said that Mechanus has multiple layers, but later books changed that. Besides, if I went with the second view, I'd have other problems. I would have to arbitrarily decide which areas should be counted as layers and which as parts of those layers, as the books don't tell me. And I would have a ton of very short sections in the video, because unfortunately, none of the descriptions of these locations in the source material are very long. So instead of sections for each layer, I'm opting for 2 sections. One for the major locations in Mechanus, and one for all the remaining gods and their realms. The largest and most important realm in Mechanus, and also the one that most embodies the plane as a whole, is of course Regulus, the realm of Primus and the Modrons. Many realms in Mechanus are made up of just one cog, but Regulus is comprised of 64. Each one is called a sector, and these are clustered into further categories. 4 sectors makes a region, and 4 regions makes a quarter. Each sector is ruled by an octon, each region is ruled by a quarton, and each quarter is ruled by a secundus, and Primus rules over it all. The 64 cogs of Regulus are stacked rather like a pyramid, with a huge rod almost as wide as the spire in the Outlands running through the center. In 1st edition, the entirety of Mechanus was just called Nirvana, and in earlier 1st edition, before this book came out, it all was basically what Regulus is now. So the entire plane was just Regulus. Though it didn't have the same physical layout. It wasn't an infinite collection of gears, but rather a single infinitely large wheel divided into 64 sections with the Tower of Primus in the center. Regulus is as orderly and coolly logical as you can possibly get. Regulus is what Automata wishes it could be. It is devoted to the absolutes of law. So much so that Regulus is actually extremely dangerous if you don't follow the proper protocol or go through the monumentally laborious task of acquiring all the proper permits in order to make the illegal legal. And that's because the Modrons are actually quite fond of killing. Well, fond isn't the right word, but the sentence is almost always death for those who violate the law knowingly. And while I said earlier in this video that if you violate the law unknowingly, you're likely to receive a lighter sentence, I do imagine that things are much stricter within the borders of Regulus. If you break the laws of Mechanus elsewhere, perhaps you get rounded up by a squad from the Fraternity of Order, brought to the courts of Regulus, and sentenced to scrub some gears in Subzone 4 of Zone 314B of Mechanus, as the Modrons count it. But if you break the law in Regulus, maybe they don't take it so easy on you. Maybe they just divide your body into volumetrically equal fourths, which in most people is fatal. You see, while there's certainly a lot of courthouses and record buildings and bureaus and other government buildings, there's also a lot of execution places, both public and private. The Modrons don't really care where they kill people. As I said earlier, the Modrons just don't see the point of a life that doesn't respect law. Every building of a given type in Regulus looks exactly the same. So while it may not be easy to navigate Regulus as a whole on account of how massive it is, and presumably how hard it is to understand the logic of the Modrons, At least it's easy to find a certain kind of building if you already know what they look like. But it truly is a massive place. Even though it's divided up governmentally into sectors, regions, and quarters, it's all one giant, sprawling city. I often think of the city of Dis in Beator as one of the largest cities in the multiverse, but Regulus makes Dis seem tiny by comparison. I imagine it to be at least as big as all of Earth. Though for a place that massive, and for a people so orderly, you've got to imagine that there are highly effective and timely means of public transportation, like the Concordant Express. Of course, it may be a nightmare for a non-Modron to figure out the transit map, but at least you wouldn't have to walk everywhere. Even though monodrones are the most numerous type of Modron, the most common type of Modron you're likely to run into while in Regulus are the quadrones. This is because they fill the basic bureaucratic positions that any outsider is bound to encounter. If you want to talk to any rank higher than a quadrone, there's a lengthy petition process. The higher rank you wish to contact, the more lengthy. And when you get approval, you have to go through the process again. Double approval is the standard in Regulus. Though it's not all just Modrons here. Because Regulus is such a rigid and at times convoluted place, there's a rather large market for guides to help people navigate the rigmarole of the realm. All these guides are properly licensed, of course, and they each have a different specialization. Some are adept at maneuvering through the permit bureaus, some have an in with the record offices, some are experts at handling court proceedings, and most of them are licensed to speak with higher ranks of Modrons without needing to get double approved each time. The best of these guides is a Githzerai known as Black Pete. He's licensed for just about everything, and his results are guaranteed for the low price of 2,000 gold a day. You might be wondering, if Regulus, and also Automata to a lesser degree, is such a tangle of laborious bureaucracy, how do the Modrons get anything done? Well, I think for the Modrons, this isn't a problem. For them, this is ideal. For them, it's so intuitive and they're so used to it all that it's basically automatic. They know what to do and do it immediately or pass the task on to an underling who does it immediately. And if they do have to wait through lengthy processes, they probably don't mind. I could also easily imagine that a common task assigned to monodrones is wait in this line for me. The two grandest and most important places in all of Regulus are Primus' Tower and the Modron Cathedral, though this book makes them the same thing. They both sit in the heart of the realm. Primus' Tower is where Primus can be found submerged in the Modron energy pool. The Modron Cathedral is an extremely tall and extremely slender tower, almost a church steeple, apparently in defiance of all natural laws, as its inside seems to be much bigger than its outside would allow. But this is actually something of an illusion, taking advantage of clever architectural design and tricks of perspective, so it adheres to the natural laws, just as you would expect from the Modrons. Nonetheless, it's a huge space inside, with the balconies of hundreds of floors circling around an open center of vaulted ceilings so high they disappear into darkness above. To be allowed in, you need to be carrying a pass from the Central Office of Processing and Requests, plus have an escort of at least 2 pentadrones per person. But going through the hassle of arranging that is worth it, as there's something truly incredible inside the cathedral. In the center of the cathedral is a gigantic model of gears and spheres spinning around each other in perfect synchronicity. This giant machine is the Orrery, an incredibly accurate and complex model of the entire multiverse. And while I'm sure it's incredibly useful for things like predicting cosmic realignments and the movements of planets, it's more prized for its usefulness as a scrying device. If you concentrate on a particular location represented by the orrery, you'll find yourself drawn closer in, able to view that location as if you're there. You can use this to observe vast regions from a zoomed-out perspective, or zoom in so close that it's like you're standing right next to the person you're scrying. You aren't able to hear them, but you could read their lips. The only things you can't see are people or places protected from scrying, such as the realms of gods who are aware you're watching, or powerful creatures like pit fiends. But it's not just scrying that the orrery is capable of. If you scry from a perspective that would match your own standing height, you'll suddenly find yourself actually standing there, seamlessly transported across the planes. This has been known to catch unsuspecting visitors unaware, planning on just using the orrery to scry, but unintentionally being teleported to some far-flung place. If this happens to you, best hope you're not scrying somewhere dangerous. And that's not the only danger of it. For those who haven't sufficiently grasped the infinite vastness of the multiverse, which is most people, using the orrery stands a good chance of driving you insane. In game terms, the first time you use this device, you have to make a difficult wisdom check. And if you fail, you go crazy for 1d6 years. When you finally recover, you'll have no memory of using the orrery, and so will have to make the same wisdom check again if you want another shot. The orrery is one of the reasons, if not the biggest reason, that Primus has such far-reaching vision. Since Primus can see through the eyes of all Modrons through the Infinity Web, well, all Modrons not in exile, he always keeps many of them stationed at the orrery, scrying on people throughout the multiverse. And of course, through this, he can easily send them to wherever he wants. I feel I should mention a somewhat similar device from the Out of the Abyss 5th edition adventure called the Maze Engine, though the Modrons call these devices Orderers. The Maze Engine is a Modron machine also resembling a model of the multiverse, though the one described in the book isn't in Regulus. It's been lost in the Underdark. Rather than a scrying and teleportation mechanism, it has the power to locally rewrite reality to bring order to chaos. Though, as I mentioned before, the importance of Regulus and the Modrons is much diminished in 3rd edition. Instead, Mechanus is overrun by Formians, having taken over cogs beyond counting. Formians are giant lawful ant creatures from Arcadia, which is why I didn't talk about them in the Creatures of Mechanus section. Formians are also called centaur ants, because they appear as upright, walking ants with somewhat humanoid faces and are much more intelligent than actual ants. Worker Formians have low intelligence for a humanoid, warriors have average intelligence, and mermarches have exceptional intelligence. Then there's also the queens, which have supra-genius level intelligence. When the Modrons suffered great losses due to Orcus' corruption, causing millions of them to go rogue, the Formians from Arcadia sensed an opportunity to expand their territory and invaded. Though this would suggest that all the Modrons that went rogue weren't immediately replaced, which surely they would have been. It's not like they wait until a rogue Modron is dead to replace them. Otherwise, Regulus would be missing multiple secundi. But I guess that's either an oversight or just one more deliberate change 3rd edition made. Anyway, in this edition, great swaths of cogs are controlled by Formians. Each of these hive cogs contains incredible hive cities on both cog faces, but there's only one queen per cog. And this is the only thing stopping the Formians from expanding even more rapidly and taking over practically the entirety of Mechanus. A new queen is born once every 100 to 1,000 years. Presumably that's per cog. Otherwise, Formian expansion would be incredibly slow. Too slow for them to control the territory that they currently do. While the Formian invasion is mostly just a 3rd edition thing, it was actually foreshadowed a bit in 2nd edition, so maybe that grants it more canonical legitimacy. As you move throughout Mechanus in the direction that the Formian invasion first began, you'll gradually find more and more Formian hive cogs, until there's nothing but hive cogs as far as you can see and farther in all directions. Millions of cogs, maybe more. At the heart of this realm is a place called the Center. It's the cog of the Scion Queen Mother, the absolute ruler of the Formians. This is the one exception to the one queen per cog rule, as the Scion Queen Mother is always attended by 33 other Formian queens. This cog is at least 3,000 miles in diameter, and the hive city that's built upon it is truly remarkable to behold, godly in its splendor. The Formians believe that this cog is the center of all of Mechanus, and is what imparts movement to all the other cogs. Another location added in 3rd edition is one of the spawning points of the Inevitables, a cog named Numanus, or perhaps it should be pronounced Neumanus, as I suspect it was named after John von Neumann, as he's considered one of the fathers of the computer. Anyway, Numanus is a factory that takes up both sides of an entire cog. It's devoid of biological life, but crawling with inevitables. Its constantly raging forges and furnaces pour out thick, sooty clouds through the cog's many smokestacks. The whole place is one smoothly operating production line. Liquid metal is poured into crystal molds, which is then cooled, tempered, and assembled into a body, which is then bathed in a magic animating oil. Each inevitable is programmed with magical runes, perhaps something like a computer chip. The particular runes used are decided by the Hub of Elders, several hundred special inevitables that peer through the cosmos, looking for broken laws so they know which type of inevitable needs to be produced. Each inevitable factory cog has its own Hub of Elders, and who knows how many there are. Numanus is not to be confused with Nemausis, which is sometimes called Munausis. Nemausis was originally a layer of Arcadia, but has quite recently moved to Mechanus and become a cog due to the overly militant ways of the Harmonium, who essentially controlled that layer before the cataclysmic cosmic realignment. But 3rd edition tells another story. There, this happened millennia ago, and was due instead to the Formian invasion, and is now one of the many cogs overrun by them. But in 2nd edition, it was the Harmonium. You see, the Harmonium, a faction of Sigil with a headquarters in Arcadia, who believe goodness is achieved through devotion to law and order, decided that it wasn't enough to just encourage others to be lawful or to punish those who break the law, but that they need to make others lawful by force. So they constructed several training camps, more like concentration camps, where they rehabilitate chaotic people and creatures. There are some who suspect that the Harmonium has been kidnapping the lawbreakers of Sigil rather than turning them over to the governors for trial. But all of this is currently a well-guarded secret, so most people aren't even aware that Arcadia has lost a layer, and most of those who do don't know why. These training camps sprang up all over Buxenus too, the 2nd layer of Arcadia. But it was Nemausis where the bulk of them were, and so it was Nemausis that crossed over first. If the Harmonium doesn't learn its lesson, or if someone doesn't stop them, they might eventually cause Arcadia to lose another layer. So now Nemausis is a place in conflict. First, there's the Harmonium, trying to reclaim their lost territory. Then there's a large force of Modrons and governors, who are trying to make the most of the circumstance and fully establish order in Nemausis so that it stays in Mechanus. They're the side with the most control over the place. Then there's the petitioners of Nemausis, who were unwillingly pulled into Mechanus, and are now trying to fight back against everyone else for control of what they see as rightfully theirs. They must have been petitioners of Arcadia itself, rather than any particular realm, as the realms that used to be in Nemausis migrated to Buxenus when the layer moved. And lastly, there's the wizards, as ever since Nemausis crash-landed in Mechanus, it's become the most accessible place in the whole plane with natural elements needed for spellcasting, like fresh water and earth. Though I would imagine that any serious wizard in Mechanus would find it more convenient to get that cog-shaped spell key. But who am I to tell a wizard what to do? Aside from the leftover Harmonium training camps and the recently built Modron fortresses, this is a place of serene natural beauty. Though natural isn't entirely the right word, as in Arcadia everything is neatly manicured. Nemausis is richly forested and covered in greenery, but the grass is all uniform, growing only to a certain height, and all the trees are arranged in straight, even lines. Though there is something of a chaotic nature to this place, which the Modrons and governors are trying to tame. When the layer shifted to Mechanus, the chaotic prisoners of the Harmonium camps escaped and fled, but a bit of their essences remain. This lingering chaos affects the minds of those who come here, making them free thinkers, mostly by imparting richly imaginative daydreams and nightmares. And it also allows those who come here to think outside the confines of Mechanus, as they're able to imagine things that don't have a reflection somewhere else in the plane, which sheds a new light on that whole feature of Mechanus that I mentioned before. It would seem from this that apparently elsewhere in Mechanus, there's a bit of a thought-constraining aura. While the petitioners of Nemausis are lawful neutral good, they have been using the chaos to their advantage. They've formed a resistance against the other forces here, particularly the Modrons and governors, as they've taken control. To help them in their fight, they've hired a chaositect to plan the warrens in which they hide and keep their headquarters, making them far too chaotic for any being of pure law to navigate. The leader of the resistance is a half-elf named Endevar Lithanol. He's actually a former member of the Harmonium, who deserted when the realignment happened. Mycelia is another large realm in Mechanus, though it's not one that you should ever expect to find. It's the home of the Myconids and their god Sillifer, Or perhaps it's pronounced Silifir. But since he's a philosopher god, I think it's more likely pronounced Silifir, because that sounds kind of close. In 4th edition, Silifir is a bit different. He's an archfey of the Feydark, which is the Feywild's version of the Underdark. But in 2nd edition, he's a god of peace and non-violence, and is disdainful of humanoids because flesh people are stupid, violent, and hasty. And so the only way to enter Mycelia is by moving away from it. The only way to find it is by not seeking it. This way, only those who are non-confrontational and can understand the mindset of the Myconids are allowed in. And if you do make it here, as soon as a violent thought pops into your head, you're immediately transported somewhere far away in Mechanus, and aren't allowed back until you atone for your transgressions and stand before a group of 9 Myconid kings for judgment, called the Circle, the next time you enter the realm. If they deem that you haven't learned your lesson, they'll sentence you to a slow, rotting death. Unlike most places in Mechanus that are on the surface of a gear, whether on the top side or bottom side or both, Mycelia is an immense cavern inside of a gear. The cave is at least 100 miles wide, which honestly doesn't seem that big, but it is at least, so it could be much bigger than that. The cavern is perfectly rounded, and all the stalagmites and stalactites are arranged in a perfect pattern. The smell of decay is ever present, though not nauseating, and the place is illuminated by a purple light that emanates from the giant mushrooms along the floor. The rest of the ground is covered in a damp layer of decaying organic matter, with tiny fungi springing up all over, which are believed to be the unformed bodies of Myconids preparing to be reborn into this realm. The air is thick with spores, so if you're not equipped to protect yourself from poison, it'll be a rather short visit. But there's something about this realm that allows you to see across the entire place, so long as nothing is physically obstructing your line of sight. But aside from stalagmites, stalactites, and the odd rock here and there, the only real obstruction is the Palace of Silifir, this realm's only structure. It's a huge, hollow mushroom in the center of the cavern, surrounded by an apparently bottomless lake. The lake is uncrossable unless Silifir allows it. Another important location in Mechanus is the home of the Fraternity of Order, or the Governors, the Fortress of Disciplined Enlightenment, though they just call it the Fortress for short. It's a massive 9-sided fortress that takes up an entire cog, with incredibly tall towers and spires and hordes of governors swarming about this place at all times, though that's not to say it's chaotic. Quite the opposite. The fortress is divided into 9 sections, and each section is devoted to a completely separate activity than the others, and no mixing is allowed. There's the farms, the barracks, the eatery, the court, the training ground, the bureaucracy, the libraries, the bazaar, and the Lady's Palace. Since the governors are a faction of Sigil, you might take that to refer to the Lady of Pain. But no, the Lady's Palace is for the ruler of the fortress, Lady Nancia Scarabutos. While she may rule the fortress, and thereby all the governors of Mechanus, she isn't the faction's true ruler. That would be Factual Hashkar, but he resides in Sigil, leaving the day-to-day administration to Lady Nancias. As you might expect from a faction that devotes itself to studying the laws of the multiverse and its loopholes, the fortress's library is massive, one of the largest known to exist. It extends far below the surface and contains the most complete collection of laws anywhere in the multiverse. This is where most of the governors that live here spend their time. But the fortress's bureaucracy is quite something to behold as well, full of committees, licensing bureaus, enforcers, and so on. It's second only to Regulus. Those are the big sites, but there are 2 more places in Mechanus that are given a reasonably long description. The towns of Delenest and Oti, and Haven. Delenest and Oti is a town of peace and tranquility. It has no ruler, rather it operates as a collective. It's a place of such order that the citizens have learned the uncanny ability to anticipate exactly what will happen, and any of the citizens can make decisions for the whole town, rendering a leader unnecessary. This has also rendered conversation essentially unnecessary. If one person opens their mouth to speak, the other will already know what they were going to say, and seeing this, the first person will already know what the other person would say in response, and so on. So there is no need. At most, entire conversations require no more than a raised eyebrow and a sigh. And in fact, most citizens have forgotten how to speak because of this. Though because Delenestin Oti sees its fair share of visitors, there are a few who are needed to act as intermediaries. These few can speak normally, but this ostracizes them from both the visitors and the other citizens. As to visitors, they're still hyper-lawful weirdos, just like everyone else here, but they're also too chaotic and individualistic to be able to understand the flow of the town, which of course isn't to say they're chaotic, they're just not lawful enough. The irony of it is that the person who's most capable of dealing with visitors, a human female named Jaro Britain, is the least in tune with the town, but because she's the most frequent face of the town, she's pegged as the leader by outsiders. Delenestinoti is a town that's too orderly even for the Fraternity of Order. Of course they'd love to rule it, but they don't even understand it. And if they did, they wouldn't want to rule it anymore. Jaroa is one of these people. She's a member of the governors, and like the rest of them, she wants to rule the town. But it's out of a desire to prove that she belongs here. What she doesn't understand is that her ambition to prove that she fits in is the only thing preventing her from actually doing it. The townsfolk are keenly aware of all the people in town that aren't fully in tune with it, like they're on a different wavelength. They don't mind their presence, but they keep them from accessing important areas of town, or they just move the important areas to somewhere else. The town is perfectly symmetrical, bordered by 20 walls, looking something like a spiderweb if seen from above. The center of town contains an open circle with 3 trees where the townsfolk meet. The town militia is comprised of whoever shows up that day, but there's always enough, as the citizens simply intuit when they're needed. In some ways, this place sounds like the Transcendent Order's dream, as it's their greatest aspiration to achieve this level of instinctive action. Though to many, Delenestinoti is an exceptionally boring place. The people are quiet, there are no inns, no nightlife, no manufacturing, nothing much of value at all. But there is one thing that people come far and wide for, and that's the citizens' ability to predict the future. They're so good at interpreting patterns and seeing the underlying order in things that they can predict the future with a high degree of probability, depending on the alignment of the querent. If the person is lawful, they can accurately tell their future out to 1 week. If they're neutral, 1 day. And if they're chaotic, they can't do it at all. But because the people who can read the future are the ones who can't speak, you need a translator, and there's bound to be some mistranslations that arise in the process, which means the predictions are never perfect. Then there's Haven, perhaps the most chaotic place in Mechanus. Well, it might be second to Nemausis, but the chaos of Nemausis is likely a passing thing. That's not to say that the town of Haven is actually chaotic. It still is Mechanus, after all. It's just a place where chaos is only frowned upon rather than being actively stamped out. It was founded as a place where lawful folk could live free of the stultifying rules of the Modrons and governors, while still being lawful, regardless of any other aspects of alignment like good or evil. It's become a place of refuge for all, even chaotics and neutrals, so long as they don't cause a disturbance, and that's pretty much the only law in town. But still, you can't allow too many chaotic types taking refuge in Haven, otherwise the town would soon find itself getting yanked out of Mechanus. To prevent that, no one is allowed to enter unless they're sponsored by someone who already lives in Haven, and each citizen can only sponsor 1 person at a time. And you wouldn't want to sponsor someone who's going to break the one rule the town has, as that would threaten your own position in town, which means that chaotics often know better than to invite more chaotics. For a town with such a policy, you might expect it to have nice strong walls and gates that are guarded at all hours. Well, Haven goes a step or 2 further. It's completely walled on all sides, so it appears as one giant square block from the outside, though it does have gates. The inside is divided into 8 levels, each of which is divided into 7ths, with a circle in the middle of each level, with 6 main passages that lead to the central area from the gates. 5 stairs leading from one level to another, with 4 sets of smaller passages made up of 3 passages apiece, 2 hidden passages in each level, which lead to a spot overlooking the central circle. Got all that? Haven's an easy place to get lost in, but once you get the hang of it, you'll never get lost again, and then is proof that you're lawful enough to move in as a permanent resident. The governors, ever yearning for control of things, aspire to rule this place, just as they aspire to rule Delenestinoti. They can frequently be found outside the gate, harassing anyone who comes in or out. Many citizens fear that the governors are going to invade one day, which might happen. But in the meantime, they're plotting how to take over Haven from the inside out. Primus and Sillifer are the two gods whose realms have been described at a reasonable length in the Planescape books, and that's why I put them in the previous section. But there are many more gods of Mechanus, if only described briefly, and this section is for them. Mechanus has kind of a lot of gods, or perhaps it's just because I'm not dividing it up by layer that it seems that way. There's Anu, Anutu, Shang-Ti, Shan-Hai-Ching, Varuna, Rudra, Yama, Nai no Kami, Avani, Lendor, Fultis, Hor, Lendis, Amanatar, Helm, Enki, and according to some sources, Utu, Horus, and Mistra. And just so you know, when I talk about gods from real-world mythology, I'm mostly drawing from D&D sources, which often have differences from their real-world counterparts, so keep that in mind. Anu is the Babylonian god of the sky, and leader of the Babylonian pantheon. Those who worship him believe that he created the heavens and the earth, and perhaps there is some truth in that. It's unlikely that he created all of the heavens and all of the earth, but he certainly could have created at least one prime material world, and those who worship him as their patron deity will end up in his afterlife that he presumably created, so he did create the only heaven they'll ever know. The entire Babylonian pantheon skews lawful overall, but Anu most of all. He's an extremely strict god, harshly punishing even the smallest infractions, and some believe that this is why the Babylonian pantheon has fallen out of favor and continues to decline. He rules his realm alongside his wife Anutu, also associated with the sky, though in real-world mythology her name is Antu, and she's sometimes considered a god of the earth. Anu's realm is called Anu's Way, which you might remember is the same name as the conduit that forms a path to his realm whenever he leaves. The realm is a gear 500 to 1,000 miles in diameter, depending on what source you believe, that interlocks with Regulus. Most of the realm is made up of a city of clay brick buildings arranged in straight, orderly lines, with his palace in the center. His petitioners have no gender and all dress the same, look the same, and even share the same memories and knowledge. It's said that they're as close as people can get to being Modrons. But Modrons don't have shared memories, so they might actually go beyond them in their collective nature. Shang-Ti, also known as the Celestial Emperor, is the Chinese god of creation and social order, and is the leader of the Chinese pantheon, or the celestial bureaucracy. He's a much more active pantheon leader than most, assigning the lesser gods tasks and judging them for their successes and failures, even going so far as to strip gods of their immortality. Despite his active involvement, Shang-Ti is overall a reclusive god, as he looks down on most other gods in the Outer Planes, so his realm, known as the Jade Palace, is in a far-off location where others are unlikely to interfere. The one god he does approve of is Primus, the only god that Shang-Ti considers lawful and orderly enough to meet his standards. And in 1st edition, his cog is right next to Primus's, on the far side of Anu's. The Jade Palace is a pristine cog where the streets are lined with carefully ordered parks, libraries of lost knowledge, and architectural wonders, with the Emperor's Palace in the center. The palace is about as bad as Regulus in terms of how many forms you have to fill out to do pretty much anything. The palace grounds are patrolled by foo dogs and foo lions and contain rows of ever-ripe peach trees that grant longevity to those who eat them, extending their lifespan by 100 years. Shang-Ti's library contains all the knowledge lost from every prime material world that recognizes his existence, as the librarians visit these places when disaster is about to strike to collect the knowledge that would otherwise be gone. Shan-Hai-Ching is the Chinese god of the wind and sea. According to 1st edition, his realm interlocks with Shang-Ti's, and its waters provide the irrigation for Shang-Ti's peaches. In fact, Shan-Hai-Ching's realm is almost entirely water, with just enough land to form the borders of the cog so that it can interlock with other disks. Many sea creatures make their home here, and there's always a fair wind blowing. Varuna is the Vedic god of cosmic order, the supreme judge and authority of the pantheon, though not actually the ruler. His realm is called the Vigilant Eye, and it's a disk polished as smooth as the reflection of the moon. I don't actually know how smooth that is, but I'm guessing it's supposed to be quite smooth. Rudra is the Vedic god of storms, disease, and death, and in pre-3rd edition lore is the creator of the Maruts, who enforce the inevitability of death. Rudra is a god that tolerates no imperfection among the other gods. He avenges grievous wrongs and rights the balance, but is also compassionless and violent. Rudra's realm, called the Focus of Energy, is a crystal spire on one of the smaller gears of Mechanus that splits into a huge chasm. In 1st edition, this chasm is a giant portal leading to the prime material plane, through which Rudra fires arrows to cull the weak. In 2nd edition, the chasm is filled with Marots, and is perhaps where they come from, rather than factories like Numanus. Some say there used to be many Rudras, which were beings representing specific forces that sprung forth from the Focus of Energy. And one of those Rudras, the force of storms and disease, vanquished or drove away all the others, becoming the Rudra. Perhaps that's why the Marots spawn here. The Focus used to be a more balanced place, a sparkling spire spawning many forces, but now all it spawns are beings of death and disease, and the spire is darkening, poisoned by the disease of Rudra. Well, because of this imbalance, and because Rudra is a neutral evil god, the Focus of Energy is unlikely to remain in Mechanus for long. Yama is the Vedic god of the judgment of the dead. Yama is said to be the first mortal who ever died, and is now charged with judging the spirits of the dead, or at least the worshippers of the Vedic pantheon, as other pantheons have other judges of the dead. Yama can view a person's entire lifespan with a single glance, and then sends them off to their appropriate realm. Though unlike most other religions, the followers of the Vedic pantheon don't actually stay in one realm for all that long, as they get reincarnated in a never-ending cycle, at least until they manage to break free of the karmic wheel, in which case they are exempt from Yama's judgment. Though 1st edition says that Varuna is the one who judges the dead, but the dead still pass through Yama's realm for some reason. Anyway, Yama's realm is called Yamasadena, and it isn't far from Rudra's Focus of Energy. It's a small realm with a soft light of great purity shining in the center. I can't imagine the place has many petitioners, though it certainly has lots of people passing through. The realm is surrounded by a river of blood called Vedarani, which all who enter the realm must wade through. While crossing, they get spattered with an amount of blood equal to the karmic debt they accrued in life, making it easier for Yama to determine where they should go next. Nai-no Kami is the Japanese god, or kami, of earthquakes. His realm is called the Shaking Land. That's really all the D&D sources have to say about this god, as far as I can tell. In real-world mythology, Shintoism to be specific, Nai-no Kami isn't really the name of a god, but more a general name, like a title. It means god of the earthquakes, supposedly. I don't really have a good source on that, though, and Google Translate tells me something very different. Avani is the goddess of sun, reason, and magic in the Birthright campaign setting. Her realm, the Gleaming Spire, is one of quiet study and contemplation, a place where logic rules. No action taken without thought is successful here, and anyone who thinks themselves above logic and order can't even enter the realm. The Gleaming Spire occupies both sides of one of Mechanus' gears, with palaces and tunnels throughout. Lendor is the god of time, tedium, patience, and study in the Greyhawk campaign setting, or Grey Space. He's said to have started the flow of time at the birth of the universe with a single blow from Afterglow, his flaming sword. His realm is called the Wheel of Time, which does not have anything to do with the book series or TV show of the same name. Fultus is the god of law and order in Grey Space. He's also a god of light, the sun, and the moon, and his followers believe that he set the sun and the moon in the sky to show all creatures the one true way, a strict path which allows no deviation. His realm is called the Path of Law. Horror is the god of revenge, retribution, and poetic justice of the Forgotten Realms campaign setting, or Realm Space. And yes, his name really is Horror, though it's not spelled like that. His realm is called the Doom Court. Lendis is the dragon god of balance and justice. He's a huge platinum dragon who has no mercy, no forgiveness, and gives no second chances. His realm isn't even given a name, so I suppose it's just up to you to make it up. If you want me to make it up for you, then my choice is the Scale of Justice. That's also one of his nicknames, but I think it's fitting for a realm name too. A Monitor is a god of the sun, law, and rulership in Realm Space. He was worshipped by the ancient Netherese Empire before its fall. He then died due to lack of worshippers, and is still dead at the time of 2nd edition Planescape, But then a Monitor started being worshipped as an aspect of the god Lathander, which brought him back to life, and for a time they were intertwined, but eventually became separate entities again. So now a Monitor is back in action. His realm is called the Keep of the Eternal Sun. Helm is also a god from realm space, the god of guardians and protection. Like many of the gods of Mechanus, he's stern and often viewed as emotionless, though this isn't completely true, as he does have a soft spot for children and is slightly more lenient with them. Helm is a relatively obscure god now, but he used to be a big deal. During the time of Troubles, when Ao forced the other gods of realm space to wander the world as mortals, Helm was allowed to keep his divinity, and was tasked with guarding the gates to the outer planes to prevent the other gods from reclaiming their power. And so for keeping the mortal gods bound to the earth, he was blamed for much of the carnage that ensued, leading to a massive decrease in his worship. His realm is known as Everwatch. In the World Tree cosmology, Everwatch is instead a tower in the House of the Triad, a realm consisting of 3 mountains encircling Mount Celestia. Ilmater, Torm, and Tyr each have 1 mountain, and Everwatch seems to move between them. Anytime a portal opens to the House of the Triad, Helm's Tower moves to that location, and a mysterious guardian clad from head to toe in mithril plate armor senses the purpose of the visitors, to deem whether they're allowed in or not. Enki is the Sumerian god of rivers and oceans. His realm is called the Water Wheel. It's a watery disk bridged by a span of woven gold and finely crafted crystal, though it's actually probably not there anymore, because Enki is dead. You see, Enki was a great binder of Tanari, and Nergal, the Babylonian god of the underworld, lured him to a spot in the lower planes, supposedly overrun with Tanari. Nergal then bound him, while Anshar, the Babylonian god of darkness, killed him. Utu is the Sumerian god of the sun, and is actually a chaotic god. You might be wondering why a chaotic god has a realm in Mechanus. Well, he doesn't anymore. Back when Enki was alive, it was his job to keep Utu under control. Utu, Enki, and Anu's realms all interlocked. But Enki died, and Utu's realm cosmically realigned to Arborea, where it belonged. But I'm still including Utu in this list because he used to be a god of Mechanus, and his lore involves Mechanus. But also, maybe you want to use this as part of your D&D campaign. Just because Enki is dead and Utu's realm has left Mechanus according to the current lore, doesn't mean it has to be that way in your game. You could set your game in a past part of the canon, or just ignore canon and use what you like. But Utu's realm leaving Mechanus does raise a question. Remember way earlier in this video when I described the plan that the Brigadiers of Law have to grind all motion in the universe to a halt by removing one of Mechanus' cogs? Well, Utu's realm left, and all motion didn't grind to a halt. This suggests one of 2 things. The Brigadiers of Law are wrong, and Mechanus can carry on fine if a cog gets removed. Clearly, Mechanus can carry on fine if a cog gets added, as we can see with the recent addition of Nemausus. Or, when a realm leaves Mechanus, it doesn't take the cog it inhabits with it. Perhaps when a realm moves to a new plane, it's like the cog gets wiped clean as all of its features get pulled away. Anyway, his realm is called the Absorbing Light, and it's a very mysterious place. This is because no one who enters ever comes out again. It's said that anyone who sets foot in the place merges with Utu, which is only making him increasingly chaotic as he's developing a more and more severe case of multiple personality disorder. Another god who resides in Mechanus in 1st edition is Horus, the Egyptian god of the sky, the sun, and revenge. Horus has the head of a hawk, and his servants are actual hawks as well as man-like hawks known as the Horuseer. His realm is a Spartan disk not far from Regulus, but not directly connected to it. But that was later changed, not necessarily because of any cosmic realignment, but more of a retcon. In 2nd edition, Horus resides in Arcadia, in a realm called Heliopolis that's shared with a few of the other Egyptian gods like Ra, Isis, and Osiris. In the World Tree cosmology, Heliopolis is its own plane, and many more Egyptian gods live there. The last god is also one that doesn't really live here, and that's Mystra, the goddess of magic in the Forgotten Realms setting. In the early Planescape books, she was said to share a realm with Helm for some reason, but then it was changed so that she had a realm of her own, named Dwemerheart, in Elysium. And if you're using the World Tree cosmology, Dwemer Heart is just its own thing, and is where the inevitables come from. And as you can see, there's a lot of possible places they come from. And that's the complete tour of Mechanus. Well, it's not truly the complete tour. The planes are infinite after all, but you'll just have to fill the rest in yourself. Though I think there's plenty here that you don't really need to add anything in to make this a full location to bring your players to. This video took me a long time to make. Part of that is that I went on vacation, part of that is that I kept on finding new material to read, and part of that is that it's just a long video. My second longest, I think. But the length of this video is a testament to how much I like Mechanus. It's hard to say, but it might be my favorite plane. It's certainly not the one I think I would go to as a petitioner, and also not the one that I would want to go to most, but I just find it interesting and unique. I've always loved the Modrons, and I hope you've enjoyed this video as much as I like Modrons. I think the next video will be a chaotic plane, as I've got quite the skew toward lawful planes at this point, so we've got to balance that out a bit. If you want to have control over which video I make next, or if you'd just like to help me make these videos, then consider becoming a Patreon supporter. It really helps. And if you're looking for some high-quality dice, remember to use the code WadeAllen at dicenest.com for 15% off your order. But if you don't want to spend any money, which is perfectly reasonable, then at the very least consider subscribing to my channel. But either way, thank you for watching.